I don't care who your father supposedly is. You two aren't getting on this jet." Captain James Harrington's voice cut through the pristine private terminal at Miami Executive Airport like a slap as he stared down at the two 17-year-old black teenagers. Amara and Naomi Jackson stood clutching their charter confirmation documents, their Westfield Academy uniforms marking them as students from one of Florida's most prestigious preparatory schools. The other clients waiting in the luxury lounge exchanged knowing glances and smirks. Another case of entitled teenagers trying to game the system, thinking they could talk their way into private jets they clearly couldn't afford. But then something extraordinary happened. The uncertainty in Amara's voice disappeared. Her shoulders straightened. When she lifted her phone and looked directly at Captain Harrington, there was something burning in her dark eyes that made his condescending smile freeze on his face. "We're calling our father," she said, her voice no longer pleading. It was calm, controlled, and absolutely terrifying. Dead silence fell over the private terminal. Harrington's fingers stopped mid-gesture. The smirking client suddenly looked uncomfortable because everyone just realized they had treated exactly the wrong family with such prejudice. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe everyone deserves equal treatment, regardless of appearance, hit that subscribe button and share this video. Miami Executive Airport's private aviation terminal buzzed with its usual controlled elegance on this crisp Tuesday morning in October. Meridian Aviation's charter flight, MA-8753 to Boston, was scheduled to depart in 2 hours, giving the identical twins plenty of time to navigate what should have been a routine boarding process for their important college tour trip. Amara and Naomi Jackson had been planning this journey for months. At 17, they were among Westfield Academy's most promising students. Amara, with her perfect 4.0 GPA and early admission prospects for Harvard's pre-law program, Naomi, with her perfect SAT scores and scholarship offers from Yale's business school. Their father, Dominic Jackson, had finally agreed to charter a private jet for their college interviews, a milestone that represented trust independence and the beginning of their adult lives. What made this trip even more special was that it marked the first time Dominic had allowed his daughters to handle the charter arrangements themselves using the family's corporate account, but managing all the logistics independently. The charter had been booked a week earlier through Meridian Aviation's premium portal, with full payment processed and confirmation received within hours. The twins approached the Meridian Aviation check-in counter with the quiet confidence that came from excellent upbringing and legitimate business. Their charter confirmation printed at home clearly showed departure time, 11:20 a.m. for Boston. Logan Airport with return scheduled for Thursday evening. Their student IDs from Westfield Academy were pristine, their excitement barely contained beneath their composed exteriors. The terminal itself was a testament to luxury and exclusivity. Italian marble floors gleamed under soft lighting. The waiting area featured handcrafted leather chairs, ambient music, and attentive staff offering premium refreshments to clients. Large windows offered panoramic views of sleek private jets lined up on the tarmac, their polished exteriors reflecting the Florida sunshine. Every detail of the space was designed to reinforce a sense of privilege and exceptional service for those deemed worthy of it. Amara glanced at her sister, a slight smile playing at her lips. They were mirror images of each other with the same deep brown eyes, high cheekbones, and flawless complexion. But where Amara wore her hair in a sleek professional bob, Naomi preferred an elegant natural style that framed her face with tight curls. Their Westfield uniforms, navy blazers with the school crest, crisp white shirts, and pleated skirts, marked them as students of distinction and privilege. "Ready?" Amara whispered, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had been preparing for this moment for years. It wasn't just about a college tour. It was their first real step toward the independence they had been raised to embrace. Naomi nodded, her expression more animated than her sister's. "Let's do this. Dad will be so proud when we nail these interviews." Neither of them could have anticipated how differently the day would unfold. Ryan Whitfield looked up from his computer terminal with the practiced efficiency of someone who had processed thousands of high-net-worth clients. But when his eyes settled on the two young black women in front of him, something in his demeanor shifted. The professional smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, so brief that most wouldn't notice, but the twins had been taught from childhood to read these subtle cues. His welcoming tone turned just a touch cooler, the warmth in his eyes dimming ever so slightly. For a brief moment, Ryan hesitated, an almost imperceptible flicker of internal conflict passing across his face. Something about these well-dressed teenagers didn't fit his mental image of Meridian's typical clientele, and he felt that familiar instinct to scrutinize more carefully. He glanced at his colleague who processed the previous passenger, a white businessman in his 50s, with casual efficiency. Ryan's gaze returned to the twins, his decision made. Charter confirmation and identification. He said, his voice notably cooler than it had been for the white businessman he had just helped board a similar Gulfstream G650. Amara placed their documents on the marble counter with careful precision. Good morning. We're checking in for the Boston charter departing at 11:20 a.m. Ryan picked up their charter confirmation, his eyebrows rising as he examined the private jet assignment and premium service package. He turned the documents over, held them up to the light, and examined them with the kind of scrutiny typically reserved for suspected forgeries. These don't look quite right, he announced, deliberately keeping his voice just loud enough for nearby clients to overhear. Where exactly did you get this charter confirmation? Amara felt her throat tighten slightly, a familiar sensation whenever she encountered this kind of scrutiny. Her palms grew warm, and she was suddenly acutely aware of the glances from other passengers. She took a slow, deliberate breath the way her father had taught her. Naomi's jaw tightened slightly, but her voice remained steady. Our father arranged the charter directly through Meridian Aviation's website. Is there a specific issue with the documentation you can point out? Ryan's lips pressed into a thin line as he continued examining papers that were clearly legitimate and professionally printed. I'll need to verify this with the system. Wait here. He disappeared into a back office, taking their documents with him. The twins stood at the counter for nearly 20 minutes while other clients were processed efficiently around them. They could feel the stares, hear the whispered comments, sense the assumptions being made about two black teenagers with a private jet charter worth more than most people's annual salaries. The delay was excruciating. Amara checked her phone repeatedly, worried about their tight schedule. Their first college interview was scheduled for 3 p.m. at Harvard, followed by a dinner meeting with Yale administrators. Missing this charter would mean missing opportunities they'd worked years to earn. What's taking so long? Naomi whispered, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her designer backpack, a gift from their father when they'd both made the honor roll last semester. Stay calm. Dad taught us about this. Remember? Sometimes your patience is the only weapon you have. The sisters exchanged a knowing glance, remembering their father's lessons. Dominic Jackson had prepared his daughters for a world that wouldn't always welcome them with open arms. You'll face obstacles others don't. He'd told them once, his voice solemn as they sat in his home office surrounded by aviation industry awards and family photos. Some people will look at you and see only your skin color, not your brilliance or your character. When that happens, don't give them the reaction they expect. Give them the dignity they didn't offer you. Those words echoed in Amara's mind now as she maintained her composure, her back straight, her expression neutral despite the growing knot in her stomach. She remembered the first time her father had shown them the ropes of the business world, taking them to meetings when they were younger, explaining contracts and negotiations, teaching them to navigate spaces that weren't designed with them in mind. People may try to make you feel small, he'd said once after Amara came home crying because a teacher had ignored her raised hand repeatedly in class. Your job isn't to shrink. It's to stand so tall they have to look up to see you. As they waited, Amara noticed a woman in elegant business attire observing them from across the terminal. Unlike the other staring passengers, her gaze wasn't dismissive or suspicious, but intensely focused and evaluating. She carried no visible meridian identification, yet staff members nodded deferentially as she passed. When she caught Amara looking, she didn't avert her gaze, but instead gave a barely perceptible nod before turning her attention to a tablet in her hand. Something about the encounter left Amara with an odd feeling, not exactly hope, but perhaps the sense that they were being seen by someone with actual authority. When Ryan finally returned, he placed new documentation on the counter with an air of false authority and barely concealed satisfaction. There was a problem in the system, he announced loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. This charter has been canceled due to payment processing issues. What happened next would change everything the twins thought they knew about private aviation. Amara examined the cancellation notice with growing confusion and alarm. The document looked official, but something felt fundamentally wrong about the entire situation. "But this shows the charter was arranged and confirmed last week," she said, pulling out her phone to access their email confirmation. "Our father has the booking receipt showing full payment was processed successfully." Ryan leaned forward across the marble counter, lowering his voice with barely concealed hostility that made nearby clients turn to stare. "Listen, I don't know what kind of—" He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Game you two are trying to play here, but certain people need to understand that private aviation isn't for everyone. You should be grateful commercial airlines exist for people in your situation." The phrase, "certain people," hung in the air like poison gas. There was absolutely no mistaking his meaning, and the racial undertones were crystal clear to everyone within hearing distance. Naomi's hands clenched at her sides, her entire body tensing with righteous anger. Her chest tightened, her breathing becoming shallow as a rush of adrenaline coursed through her system, the body's ancient response to threat to being cornered with nowhere to go. But Amara placed a restraining hand on her sister's arm, feeling the tremor of rage beneath her fingertips. They had been taught by their parents and Westfield Academy counselors that displays of anger from young black women were too often weaponized against them, used as justification for even worse treatment. Our father specifically arranged this charter through your premium corporate portal. Amara insisted, keeping her voice level and professional despite the growing fire in her chest. The confirmation number is MA8753, and I have the complete email chain documenting the transaction. I'd like to speak to a supervisor, please. Ryan's smile turned predatory, revealing teeth that seemed sharper than they should be. Supervisors in an important meeting with actual clients. If you have a problem with the cancellation, you can take it up with customer service. They have a complaints department specifically for these kinds of situations. Next, the dismissal was brutal and final. Ryan had already turned his attention to the next client in line, a middle-aged white man in an expensive suit who received the warm, professional greeting that had been denied to the twins. Humiliated, angry, and increasingly desperate about their tight timeline, the twins collected their altered documents and moved away from the counter. Other clients stared as they passed, some with what appeared to be sympathy, but most with the smug satisfaction of having their unconscious assumptions confirmed. Two black teenagers obviously didn't belong in the world of private aviation. "We should call Dad right now," Naomi whispered urgently as they found a quiet corner of the terminal. "This is insane, and we're going to miss our interviews." "No," Amara replied firmly, though doubt was beginning to creep into her voice. "He specifically told us he has that crucial board meeting today with the company's largest investors. He asked us not to call unless there was a genuine emergency, and he trusted us to handle this trip independently. This feels like a genuine emergency to me." Naomi shot back, her frustration finally beginning to show. "We'll handle it ourselves first," Amara assured her sister, though she was starting to question whether they actually could. "Let's try talking to airport security. Maybe they can verify our documents independently." But what they didn't know was that Ryan Whitfield was already on the phone with various airport departments, painting a detailed picture of two suspicious teenagers who had attempted to use what appeared to be fraudulent charter confirmations. The discrimination they'd just experienced at the check-in counter was only the beginning of a coordinated campaign designed to remove them from the airport entirely. But the truth about their treatment was even more shocking than they imagined. Have you ever been judged unfairly before you even had a chance to speak? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story has captured your attention, make sure to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. The private terminal security checkpoint should have been a routine formality. Amara and Naomi had flown commercially many times before, understood standard procedures, and had packed their belongings carefully to avoid any complications or delays. But as they approached the screening area with their canceled charter documents, they immediately noticed something deeply troubling. White clients were moving through the checkpoint with minimal interaction and professional courtesy, while travelers who looked like them were being subjected to additional screening procedures with suspicious frequency. Selected for random enhanced security screening, announced Officer Thomas Burke, though there was absolutely nothing random about the way his eyes had tracked the twins from the moment they entered the security area. His voice carried the authority of someone who had made these kinds of decisions hundreds of times before. Before making his announcement, Burke had conferred quietly with a colleague, gesturing subtly toward the twins. For a brief moment, his colleague seemed hesitant, glancing at their Westfield Academy uniforms with uncertainty. "Are you sure they look like prep school kids?" he'd whispered. Burke had nodded firmly. "Trust me, I've been doing this 20 years. I can spot trouble." But the momentary exchange revealed the machinery of discrimination at work. The conscious choice to view certain travelers through a lens of suspicion despite contrary evidence. The twins were directed to a separate screening lane, physically isolated from the general flow of clients, and subjected to a completely different level of scrutiny. Their carefully packed belongings were unceremoniously dumped onto stainless steel tables for invasive inspection, and Officer Burke's hands were deliberately rough as he pored through their personal items, examining their electronics and documents with exaggerated suspicion. Amara felt her heart hammering against her ribcage, each beat sending waves of anxiety through her body. The public spectacle of being singled out made her skin feel hot and tight, her breathing shallow. She was hyper-aware of every eye on them, every whispered comment, the weight of presumed guilt settling heavy on her shoulders. "What's this device?" Burke demanded, holding up Amara's laptop as if it were a potential weapon, rather than standard student equipment. "It's a laptop for school," Amara replied calmly, fighting to keep her voice steady and professional despite the dry mouth and slight tremor that threatened to betray her composure. "I need it for my college interviews and to access my academic records." Burke opened the device without permission, scrolling through her files with absolutely no legal authority to conduct such a search. "A lot of legal documents and academic papers on here. You some kind of activist or troublemaker?" The question was loaded with accusation and racial profiling. Amara's legal documents were research papers for her AP Government Class Scholarship application essays and college preparation materials, the completely normal academic work of a high-achieving student preparing for university admission. "I'm interested in pursuing law as a career," Amara answered carefully, recognizing that any show of indignation would be used against her. "Those are school assignments and college application materials." Burke's expression suggested he didn't believe a single word of her explanation. He spent an additional 15 minutes examining every file, every document, every piece of software on her computer, creating an obvious spectacle that drew stares and whispered comments from other clients. When he discovered Naomi's prescription allergy medication in her carry-on bag, he held up the clearly labeled pharmacy bottle as if he'd discovered dangerous contraband. "What are these pills?" he demanded loudly. "Cetirizine," Naomi explained with forced patience, her voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "For seasonal allergies. The prescription information is clearly printed on the bottle, including my name, the prescribing doctor, and the pharmacy that filled it." but Burke was already calling for his supervisor, creating unnecessary drama and public embarrassment around completely legal medication that was obviously prescribed and properly labeled. The enhanced pat-down that followed was invasive, humiliating, and deliberately excessive. The agent's hands lingered inappropriately. Their searches were far more intrusive than anything that could be justified by security concerns, and their loud commentary about the twins' belongings and appearance created a public spectacle designed to embarrass and intimidate. "Always have to be extra careful with these types," Burke announced to his colleague in a voice loud enough for everyone in the area to hear clearly. "You never know what they might be hiding or what kind of trouble they're planning to cause." A white woman waiting in the general security line pulled out her phone to record the obvious harassment and discriminatory treatment, but was immediately approached by additional security personnel and forced to delete the footage under threat of detention. Any potential witnesses to the discrimination were quickly silenced or intimidated into compliance. By the time they were finally cleared to proceed, a full hour had passed. Their belongings had been carelessly and disrespectfully repacked. Amara's laptop showed new scratches and dings from rough handling, and they were now cutting dangerously close to their departure time with no room for additional delays. "Have a wonderful flight," Burke said with mock sweetness and obvious sarcasm. "Better hurry, though. I hear private charter companies are very strict about departure times, especially for clients who can actually afford their services." Little did anyone know that every word was being recorded for evidence. As the twins gathered their belongings, Amara noticed the same elegant woman from earlier watching the scene unfold from a discreet distance. Unlike the other observers whose expressions ranged from discomfort to morbid curiosity, this woman's face remained impassive. Her eyes narrowed in calculation rather than judgment. She made a subtle note on her tablet before slipping away through a door marked "Authorized personnel only." In another corner of the terminal, a man in his mid-30s with a press badge partially hidden under his jacket observed the scene with growing interest. Ethan Winters, investigative reporter for the Miami Chronicle, had come to the airport on a tip about luxury travel fraud, but was witnessing something far more compelling. He made no move to intervene, but discreetly captured photos with his phone, his journalistic instincts telling him this story was just beginning to unfold. As they hurried through the terminal toward their departure gate, desperately trying to make up for lost time, Naomi pulled out her phone with hands that were still shaking from anger and humiliation. "We need to call Dad right now," she said urgently, her voice catching slightly. "This has gone way beyond ridiculous. This is coordinated harassment, and we're going to miss our college interviews because of discrimination." Amara checked the time on her phone and shook her head with visible reluctance. "He's in that closed-door strategy session with the board of directors right now. His assistant specifically told us he couldn't be disturbed for any reason except a genuine life-or-death emergency, and he trusted us to handle this independently. We'll document everything and tell him when he calls tonight." What they didn't know was that their father, Dominic Jackson, was actually sitting in his private office at Meridian Aviation's headquarters at that very moment, conducting his monthly comprehensive assessment of company culture and customer service quality. As the company's owner and CEO, a position he kept strictly private to shield his family from unwanted attention and to allow for honest evaluation of employee behavior, he was reviewing detailed customer service reports that painted an increasingly troubling picture of the very discrimination his daughters were experiencing in real time. In his elegantly appointed office, Dominic frowned at the reports on his screen, customer satisfaction metrics showing a disturbing pattern when broken down by demographics. He'd been raised by parents who had marched for civil rights in the 1960s, who had taught him that true success meant creating opportunities for others, not just himself. He'd built Meridian Aviation with the explicit goal of bringing excellence and accessibility to private aviation. Yet these numbers suggested a gap between his vision and reality. "There's something wrong here," he muttered to himself, comparing complaint rates across different client groups. The discrepancy was subtle enough to escape casual notice, but significant enough to raise alarm bells for someone specifically looking for it. He made a note to investigate further, unaware that his own daughters were about to provide the most compelling evidence possible. The twins didn't have time to grab a proper meal, but they desperately needed something to eat before their long day of college interviews. Their attempt to get a quick snack at Sky Lounge Cafe was met with the exact same pattern of hostility and discrimination they'd experienced everywhere else in the terminal. The hostess, Andrea Mercer, looked up from her phone with barely concealed disgust and obvious annoyance when she saw the two black teenagers approaching her station. How many, she asked curtly, her tone noticeably different from the warm, welcoming greeting she'd just given to the white couple directly ahead of them. 2, please, Amara replied politely, maintaining her composure despite everything they'd been through. Andrea made an exaggerated show of checking her reservation tablet, scrolling through screens, and frowning as if she were dealing with an incredibly complex logistical problem. "There's going to be about a 45-minute wait for a table," she announced with obvious satisfaction. Naomi glanced around the restaurant in disbelief at the numerous empty tables clearly visible throughout the dining area. But there are several open tables right there, and more opening up as people finish their meals. "Those are all reserved," Andrea replied curtly, not bothering to look up from her tablet or acknowledge the obvious contradiction. "Your website clearly states that you don't take reservations," Amara pointed out, pulling up the restaurant's official page on her phone to display the policy. "It specifically says that seating is available on a first-come, first-served basis." Andrea's face flushed with irritation at being caught in such an obvious lie. For a moment, uncertainty flickered in her eyes, the brief recognition that she was engaging in behavior that couldn't be easily justified. She glanced toward the manager's office as if seeking guidance before hardening her expression once more. "Well, the website information is outdated and incorrect. We definitely do take reservations now, and all those tables you see are already spoken for by confirmed reservations." As if the entire scene had been carefully choreographed, a white couple walked in directly behind the twins without acknowledging the ongoing conversation or the fact that other customers were clearly ahead of them in line. Andrea immediately brightened with genuine warmth and hospitality. "2 for lunch." "Right this way. I have the perfect table available immediately." She grabbed menus and personally escorted the couple to one of the supposedly reserved tables, seating them with obvious enthusiasm and efficiency that contrasted sharply with the hostility and obstruction she'd shown the twins. "Excuse me," Naomi called after her, her patience finally wearing dangerously thin, her voice wavering slightly with the effort of maintaining composure. "We were here first, and you just told us there were no tables available for 45 minutes. Andrea turned back with obvious annoyance and barely concealed anger. "Is there some kind of problem here?" The manager, Gabriel Thompson, appeared as if he'd been waiting in the wings for exactly this moment. His name tag identified him clearly as management, but his demeanor and body language suggested he'd already decided how this interaction was going to end. "These girls are causing a disruption," Andrea explained quickly, deliberately mischaracterizing the entire situation. "I explained our reservation policy and wait times, but they're demanding immediate seating and questioning our procedures." "That's not what happened at all," Amara interjected calmly but firmly, her voice steady despite the churning anxiety in her stomach and the prickle of humiliation creeping up her neck. "Your hostess told us there was a 45-minute wait because all tables were reserved, but there are clearly open tables throughout the restaurant, and she just seated people who arrived after us." Gabriel's expression didn't change even slightly. He hadn't taken his eyes off the twins since he'd arrived, hadn't bothered to look at the empty tables or the newly seated couple, and clearly had no interest in hearing their side of the story. "I understand you're upset about the wait time, but I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voices," he said, though both girls had been speaking calmly and professionally throughout the entire interaction. "We have paying customers trying to enjoy their meals in a peaceful environment." The threat was implicit, but crystal clear. Comply with discrimination quietly or face escalating consequences. Isabella Ramirez, a Latina server who had been watching the interaction with growing concern and obvious discomfort, approached the group cautiously. She clearly wanted to help, but was afraid of the potential consequences. "Gabriel, I can definitely seat them at one of my tables," she offered quietly, her eyes darting nervously between her manager and the twins. Table 12 just finished their meal and is ready to be cleaned and reset. Gabriel turned to her slowly, his expression hardening. "Isabella, don't you have tables to attend to?" The question was mild, but the undercurrent of warning was unmistakable. "Yes, but stay out of this situation," Isabella Gabriel snapped without even looking at her. "Go check on your other customers and let management handle management decisions." Isabella hesitated for a moment, torn between following direct orders from her supervisor and doing what was obviously right. The conflict played out visibly on her face, fear of losing a job she needed, versus the moral imperative to stand against injustice. With an apologetic glance at the twins that conveyed her genuine sympathy, she reluctantly retreated, but not before discreetly slipping her business card into Amara's hand, a small act of solidarity and witness that would prove crucial later. "Look," Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper that only the twins could hear. "I strongly suggest you find somewhere else to eat. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone, and right now, you're not welcome in this establishment." The message was unmistakable and brutally clear. This wasn't about restaurant policies, wait times, or reservation systems. It was entirely about who belonged in first-class establishments and who didn't. What they didn't know was that one phone call would ground every aircraft in the Meridian aviation fleet. From a corner table, Ethan Winters observed the entire interaction, his practiced eye noting every microaggression, every lie, every manipulation. His finger hovered over his phone's record button, weighing journalistic ethics against human decency. After a moment of internal debate, he quietly began recording his expression grim as he witnessed discrimination unfold in real time. Drop a comment below if you've ever witnessed discrimination in public. Your stories help others realize they're not alone. Hungry, frustrated, and increasingly demoralized by the coordinated discrimination they'd faced at every turn, the twins finally made their way to the departure gate for charter flight MA-753. The gleaming Gulfstream G650 sat on the tarmac like a symbol of luxury and exclusivity that seemed increasingly out of their reach despite having legitimate confirmations and payment records. The departure gate area was bustling with pre-boarding activity when Amara and Naomi arrived. Other clients were already queuing for the boarding process, chatting casually about business deals and vacation plans with the easy confidence of people who belonged in this world without question. The twins checked their documentation one final time. Their original charter confirmation email, the cancellation notice from Ryan Whitfield, and Isabella's business card, with her contact information for filing a formal complaint later. Something still felt fundamentally wrong about the entire situation. Amara pulled out her phone and accessed her email, scrolling through their correspondence until she found the complete paper trail from their original booking. The evidence was clear and undeniable. Dominic Jackson had arranged the charter directly through Meridian Aviation's premium corporate portal, with full payment processed immediately and confirmation received within hours. "Look at this," she whispered to Naomi, showing her sister the screen. "Dad's original confirmation email shows everything was handled directly through Meridian Aviation's system. Ryan Whitfield completely lied to us about payment problems." Naomi's jaw tightened with anger as she reviewed the documentation. "So what do we do now?" "We can't exactly force our way onto a private jet, and we're running out of time for our interviews." "We document absolutely everything Amara decided," her voice taking on the methodical, analytical tone that had made her Westfield Academy's star debate team captain and mock trial champion. "If we're going to fight this coordinated discrimination, we need comprehensive evidence that can't be disputed or dismissed." They approached the gate agent's desk, where a harried representative named Diana Peterson was processing client requests and boarding procedures with mechanical efficiency. When the twins presented their case, showing the original confirmation email versus the current cancellation notice, Diana barely looked up from her computer screen. The check-in agent made the appropriate adjustments based on system alerts, she said dismissively, as if she were discussing routine administrative paperwork rather than potential discrimination. If there was an error in your original booking, it's been corrected through proper channels. But here's the complete email confirmation chain. Amara insisted, turning her phone screen toward Diana to display the evidence, her voice calm but insistent. My father specifically arranged this charter through your premium corporate portal. This isn't a booking error. This is an unauthorized cancellation without justification. Diana finally looked up from her computer, her expression suggesting she was being asked to solve an impossibly complex technical problem rather than verify a simple charter booking that should take 30 seconds to confirm. For the briefest moment, she glanced at the evidence on Amara's phone, and something like doubt crossed her face, a fleeting recognition that perhaps this wasn't a routine customer service issue after all. I don't see any record of a formal complaint being filed through our customer service department, she said with bureaucratic indifference, though her tone lacked the conviction of earlier interactions. And even if there was some kind of system error, the aircraft is already configured for the current client manifest. There's nothing I can do at this point. It was a transparent lie, and everyone involved knew it perfectly well. The Gulfstream G650 was configured to accommodate up to 19 passengers in luxury seating arrangements, and Diana had the complete authority to restore their charter booking with just a few keystrokes. But she wasn't going to use that authority for two black teenagers who, in her mind, probably didn't belong on private jets anyway. Naomi pulled out her phone to document the interaction and create a record of the ongoing discrimination. But Diana immediately became hostile and aggressive. Recording in the gate area isn't permitted under federal aviation regulations, she snapped, though she was completely misrepresenting the actual policies. Put that device away immediately, or I'll call security. We're not recording the gate area or any security procedures, Naomi replied calmly, maintaining her composure despite her growing frustration. We're documenting our customer service interaction for potential civil rights complaints. Put it away now. The twins exchanged meaningful glances. They were being blocked and intimidated at every single step of the process, but they weren't going to give up or accept discrimination passively. In the midst of this standoff, Amara noticed the elegant woman in the charcoal gray pantsuit observing their interaction from a discreet distance. Unlike the other staff members, she wasn't wearing a name tag, but her keen attention and the way other employees deferred to her suggested she held significant authority. When their eyes met briefly, Amara felt something unexpected, not hostility, but a calculating assessment, as if she were being measured against some unknown standard. The woman made no move to intervene, simply continuing her silent observation before disappearing down a corridor marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Something about her presence left Amara feeling both unsettled and curiously hopeful, though she couldn't have explained why. As they stood there weighing their options, Naomi nudged her sister and nodded toward a nearby seating area where a Hispanic man in his early 30s was watching them with barely concealed sympathy. When he caught them looking, he offered a subtle nod of solidarity before returning his attention to his laptop. "We're not alone," Naomi whispered. "Some people see what's happening." Amara nodded, drawing strength from the small gesture of support. "Let's try one more time. The boarding hasn't officially started yet." They moved away from Diana's desk, regrouping to plan their next approach. Around them, the terminal continued to buzz with the privileged energy of private aviation champagne being served in crystal flutes, attendants catering to every whim of wealthy travelers, the unmistakable aura of exclusivity that permeated every interaction. The contrast between this rarefied atmosphere and the treatment they'd received couldn't have been more stark. It was as if an invisible barrier separated them from the world they had every right to participate in, a barrier made not of glass or steel, but of assumptions, prejudices, and a deeply entrenched system that marked them as outsiders based solely on their appearance. "I feel like I'm in a bad dream," Naomi murmured, her normally vibrant confidence dimmed by hours of relentless discrimination. How can this be happening in 2023? Amara squeezed her sister's hand, her own determination hardening into something like steel. It's not a dream. It's just reality showing its true face, and we're going to make sure everyone sees it too. As the boarding process began, the twins watched in growing dismay as other clients moved through the procedures with smooth efficiency and professional courtesy. The contrast between their treatment and everyone else's was becoming increasingly impossible to ignore or dismiss as coincidence. What came next would shock everyone at Miami Executive Airport. If you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect regardless of how they look, hit that like button and share this video. As the boarding process began, Captain James Harrington, who had been conducting his final pre-flight briefing and safety checks, had been monitoring the situation from a distance. As Meridian Aviation's most senior pilot and a company veteran with over 15 years of experience, he commanded significant respect and authority throughout the organization. Unfortunately, like many of his colleagues, he had developed deeply ingrained assumptions about who belonged in the rarefied world of luxury private aviation. When the twins finally approached the aircraft entrance with their documentation, Captain Harrington was waiting for them with obvious suspicion and barely concealed hostility. "Good morning, ladies," he said with false pleasantness that fooled no one. "I'll need to examine your charter confirmations before you can board." Harrington took their documents and began examining them with theatrical and exaggerated scrutiny, holding them up to the light, comparing them to information on his tablet, and frowning as if he'd discovered major discrepancies or security concerns. But even as he performed this elaborate charade, something flickered behind his eyes, a momentary hesitation, a fleeting recognition of the exceptional quality of their documentation. He glanced briefly at their Westfield Academy uniforms, the school crest clearly visible on their blazers. For a split second, doubt crossed his features. These weren't just any teenagers. They carried the unmistakable polish of elite education. His hand hovered over his tablet, his finger poised to approve their boarding. Then his gaze swept past them to the expectant line of wealthy passengers behind them, the regular clientele who fit his mental image of private jet travelers, and his expression hardened once more. He had made his choice. "There seems to be a significant problem here," he announced loudly enough for other clients and airport personnel to hear clearly. "These documents appear to have been altered or modified. Please step aside while I verify their authenticity." "What kind of alterations?" Amara asked, though she already suspected where this was heading. Her stomach knotted painfully, the persistent humiliation of the day threatening to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. "The formatting doesn't match our standard charter confirmations, and there are several inconsistencies in the booking codes Harrington claimed, making up technical problems that didn't exist. I'm going to need to see additional identification and proof of payment." It was a completely absurd accusation. The charter confirmation had been printed directly from their email that morning and showed absolutely no signs of tampering, modification, or alteration. But Harrington was creating a public scene, drawing maximum attention to the twins and painting them as potential security threats or fraudsters. "Here are our student IDs from Westfield Academy," Naomi explained, producing their official identification cards, her hand trembling slightly with suppressed emotion. "They include the school CLR photographs and authorized signatures from school administrators." Harrington inspected the IDs with the same theatrical suspicion he'd shown their other documents. "Student identification can be easily fabricated with modern technology. I need something more official and government-issued." "We're 17 years old," Amara pointed out with forced patience, her voice steady despite the cold sweat forming at the small of her back. "We don't have driver's licenses yet, and Meridian Aviation specifically confirmed these IDs were sufficient when our father arranged the charter booking." Harrington reached for his radio with obvious drama and self-importance. "Security to departure, gate MA8753, please. We have a situation requiring immediate assistance. The announcement echoed through the terminal, causing nearby clients to stop their conversations and stare at what appeared to be the apprehension of two teenage criminals. Some pulled out phones to record what they assumed would be an arrest, while others whispered among themselves about security threats and suspicious behavior. Ethan Winters moved closer, his press instincts fully engaged now. He positioned himself at an angle that allowed him to capture both the twins and Captain Harrington and frame his phone recording discreetly from his pocket. Whatever was happening here had progressed far beyond a simple customer service dispute. Naomi felt a wave of dizziness sweep over her as the public spectacle unfolded. The room seemed to tilt slightly, her vision narrowing as the accumulated stress and humiliation of the day pressed in on her. Her throat felt painfully tight, each breath requiring conscious effort as her body responded to the sustained assault on her dignity. "This is discrimination," Naomi stated firmly, no longer willing to pretend this was all just a series of unfortunate misunderstandings or administrative errors. Her voice cracked slightly, betraying the emotional toll of the day. "We have legitimate charter confirmations and proper identification. You're preventing us from boarding because we're black." Harrington's face flushed red with anger at having his motivations called out so directly and publicly. "That's a very serious accusation, young lady. I could have you arrested and banned from this airport for making false claims against airline personnel." The threat hung in the air like a sword designed to intimidate them into silence and compliance. But before the situation could escalate further, a new voice entered the conversation with authority that seemed to change the entire dynamic. "What seems to be the problem here, Captain Harrington?" That's when the real truth about Meridian Aviation emerged. The woman who approached was perhaps in her early 50s, with dark skin, graying hair pulled back in a neat professional bun, and a demeanor that suggested significant experience and authority. Her name tag identified her as Vanessa Rodriguez Supervisor. For just a moment, the twins felt a surge of hope and relief. Surely another person of color would understand exactly what was happening and would intervene on their behalf to stop the obvious discrimination. They couldn't have been more catastrophically wrong. Vanessa Rodriguez had spent 15 grueling years climbing the corporate ladder at Meridian Aviation, fighting against barriers and unconscious bias every step of the way. She'd learned early in her career that survival in the system meant never making waves, never challenging the status quo, and certainly never taking the side of clients who complained about discrimination. But her journey hadn't been that simple. In the privacy of her own thoughts, Vanessa carried the weight of countless compromises, moments when she'd looked away from injustice to protect her position, times she'd enforced policies she knew were biased. Instances when she'd tried to convince herself that excellence would shield her from discrimination, only to find that it merely changed its form. She'd become exactly what the company wanted and needed: a Hispanic face in management, providing perfect cover for policies and practices that disproportionately affected people who looked different from the typical clientele. The cost of this adaptation had been paid in pieces of her authentic self sacrificed on the altar of professional advancement. As she approached the scene, Vanessa felt the familiar tension that always accompanied these moments, the conflict between what the company expected of her and what her conscience demanded. She'd developed a carefully calibrated mask of professional detachment to hide this internal struggle. But today, faced with these two young women in their school uniforms, the mask felt particularly heavy. These two are claiming their charter documents are legitimate, Captain Harrington explained deliberately, mischaracterizing the entire situation to put the twins in the worst possible light. "They're making serious accusations of discrimination when I'm simply following standard security protocols and verification procedures." Vanessa examined their charter confirmation and student IDs with the exact same suspicion and hostility her white colleagues had shown her expression, suggesting she was dealing with obvious troublemakers and potential criminals, rather than legitimate clients with proper documentation. But even as she performed this role, her eyes met Amara's briefly, and something passed between them, a flicker of recognition, perhaps even shame, quickly suppressed beneath the weight of institutional loyalty and self-preservation. "Is there some specific reason you can't follow our standard boarding procedures like every other client?" she asked, her tone sharp with disapproval and barely concealed contempt. The betrayal hit like a physical blow to the chest. Here was someone who should have understood their situation instinctively, someone who should have recognized the coordinated pattern of treatment they'd experienced, someone who had probably faced similar discrimination herself. Instead, she was actively helping to perpetuate the very system that oppressed them all. "We've been following your procedures all day," Amara replied carefully, recognizing that any show of emotion would be used against them. "We've been subjected to additional screening at every checkpoint had our legitimate charter illegally canceled without justification. And now we're being accused of fraud for trying to board with proper documentation." Vanessa's expression hardened further, her disapproval becoming more obvious and aggressive. But beneath the performative hostility, her eyes darted nervously to the security cameras positioned throughout the terminal, the all-seeing electronic witnesses to this unfolding injustice. "I don't appreciate your attitude or your accusations, young lady. If you continue making unfounded claims against our professional staff, I'll be forced to deny you boarding entirely and have you removed from the premises." The threat was crystal clear. "Shut up. Accept the discriminatory treatment quietly, or face even worse consequences, including potential arrest." Amara looked at her sister, seeing her own sense of defeat and despair reflected perfectly in Naomi's eyes. They were exhausted, hungry, and rapidly running out of options. Their college interviews were scheduled to begin in just a few hours, and missing this charter would mean missing opportunities they'd worked for years to earn. The coordinated discrimination had been bad enough when it came from white employees. But this betrayal by someone who should have been an ally felt like the final crushing blow. "Fine," Amara said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "We understand." But as Captain Harrington made a show of examining their documents one final time, and they prepared to accept whatever crumbs of accommodation might be offered, both twins were secretly documenting everything on their phones. They might have been forced to accept this treatment today, but they weren't going to let it end here without consequences. What they didn't know was that one final devastating humiliation awaited them before they could reach their seats. What followed would destroy the careers of everyone involved. If you've ever been in a situation where you felt powerless against unfair treatment, let us know in the comments. Your story matters. The jet bridge stretched ahead like a final gauntlet, and at its end stood one last obstacle to their journey. Michael Lawson, Meridian Aviation's onboard services coordinator, stood guard at the aircraft entrance with the lazy authority of someone who'd made snap judgments about clients based on their appearance for years. Most passengers flowed past him with minimal interaction, a quick glance at their confirmation, a professional nod, and they were welcomed aboard with courtesy and efficiency. But when Amara and Naomi approached, Michael's demeanor immediately shifted into the now familiar pattern of suspicion and hostility they'd encountered throughout their airport ordeal. "Hold on there," he said, stepping directly into their path and blocking access to the aircraft. "I need to double-check something important." He took their charter confirmations and made an elaborate show of examining them against a printed manifest, though it was obvious he was simply stalling for time and creating another public spectacle. Other clients were forced to wait behind them in line, creating exactly the kind of embarrassing scene that had characterized their entire airport experience. The elegant woman in the charcoal pantsuit had reappeared this time, positioned near the aircraft door, where she could observe the entire interaction. Her presence seemed to make Michael slightly nervous. He glanced her way several times, his performance becoming more exaggerated with each look. If she was someone in authority, her silent observation was doing nothing to prevent the continuing discrimination. These seats were supposed to be assigned to other clients, Michael announced, though he was clearly reading from no official document or manifest. There seems to be some major confusion about your reservations and boarding eligibility. Amara's patience, worn completely thin by hours of coordinated mistreatment and discrimination, finally reached its absolute breaking point. Her hands trembled not with fear, but with suppressed rage. She felt a strange calm descend over her, the clarity that comes when there is nothing left to lose. "No, there's no confusion whatsoever," she said, her voice steady but filled with righteous anger. "This is the charter we arranged after our original booking was illegally canceled without justification. We've been harassed, delayed, and discriminated against at every single step of this process, and we're not going to accept any more lies or excuses." The words hung in the air like a direct challenge to the entire system. Michael's face flushed with rage. No one, especially not a black teenager, had ever spoken to him with such directness and moral authority. "That's it," he snarled, reaching for his radio with obvious satisfaction. "Security to Jet Bridge MA8753. We have disruptive passengers requiring immediate removal from the aircraft." Within minutes, 2 security guards appeared. Frank Wilson and Derek Miller, both approaching with the aggressive posture and hostile demeanor of men who'd already decided the twins were criminals and troublemakers before hearing a single word of explanation. "What seems to be the issue here?" Wilson asked, addressing Michael directly, rather than the twins, making it clear whose version of events he was prepared to believe. "These two are refusing to accept their charter cancellation and are making false accusations against multiple airline staff members," Michael explained, painting a completely fabricated picture of the situation. "They're becoming increasingly disruptive and are interfering with normal boarding procedures for legitimate clients." "We are not being disruptive in any way?" Naomi protested with as much dignity as she could muster, her voice steady despite the mounting pressure and intimidation tactics being employed against them. "We're simply trying to understand why our completely legitimate charter keeps being questioned, canceled, and now blocked by staff members who seem determined to prevent us from traveling." Miller, the larger and more intimidating of the 2 security guards, stepped forward with obvious intent to physically intimidate the teenagers. His bulk cast a shadow over them as he positioned himself uncomfortably close, using his size as a weapon of psychological warfare. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to immediately lower your voice and cooperate fully with airline personnel," he said in a tone that suggested non-compliance would result in immediate arrest. "Any further resistance or disruption will result in your removal from these premises and potential criminal charges." "We've been cooperating all day long," Amara replied, her voice remaining remarkably calm despite her rising anger and the increasingly threatening situation. "We've submitted to illegal searches that violated our privacy, accepted unauthorized changes to our legitimate charter booking, and endured coordinated harassment and discrimination from multiple employees. We're not going to be intimidated into silence anymore, and we're certainly not going to accept being treated like criminals for the crime of expecting equal treatment and basic human dignity." The Jet Bridge had transformed into a public theater with other clients openly recording the confrontation on their phones as the situation escalated beyond what anyone had expected. Some passengers looked genuinely sympathetic to the twins' plight, recognizing obvious discrimination when they saw it, while others seemed convinced they were witnessing the rightful apprehension of troublemakers who had finally been caught in their deception. "Recording security procedures is strictly prohibited under federal aviation regulations," Wilson declared authoritatively, though no actual security procedure was taking place, and he was completely misrepresenting the law. "I need everyone to put their phones away immediately or face potential detention and questioning." It was a transparent lie designed specifically to eliminate witnesses and prevent documentation of their discriminatory actions. But several passengers continued recording anyway, sensing they were witnessing something historically significant and morally important. Throughout this confrontation, the mysterious woman had remained in position, watching intently. Now she stepped slightly closer, her attention particularly focused on how the security guards were handling the situation. She appeared to be taking mental notes, her expression growing increasingly troubled as the scene unfolded. Ethan Winters had positioned himself at an optimal angle, his journalistic experience allowing him to capture the entire confrontation without drawing attention to himself. His expression grew increasingly grave as he witnessed the escalation of intimidation tactics against the teenage girls. This was no longer just a story. It was becoming a moral imperative to document what was clearly coordinated discrimination. Michael pulled out what appeared to be a printed manifest and made an elaborate show of consulting it, though everyone present knew he was simply trying to create justification for his earlier false claims and discriminatory behavior. According to this official document he announced with theatrical authority, these seats were reassigned due to operational requirements and safety concerns. These individuals will need to make alternative transportation arrangements immediately. The charter isn't operationally compromised in any way, Amara stated with the factual precision that had made her Westfield Academy's champion debater. I can clearly see through the aircraft door that the jet is fully prepared for departure. The cabin is properly configured and other passengers are boarding normally. You're attempting to remove us because you've made assumptions about who belongs on private aircraft based entirely on our race and age. The direct accusation of racism hung in the air like an explosive charge, and Michael's reaction confirmed its absolute accuracy. His face contorted with barely controlled rage at having his true motivations exposed so clearly and publicly. "That's enough of your accusations and disruption," he snarled with unconcealed venom. "You two are now officially banned from this aircraft and from Meridian Aviation permanently. Security escort them off the premises immediately and ensure they don't return." But Amara wasn't finished yet. With the same calm precision and moral authority that had made her Westfield Academy's most respected student leader, she pulled out her phone and began making what would prove to be the most consequential call in Meridian Aviation's corporate history. "We're calling our father," she announced, her voice cutting through the chaos with absolute authority and unwavering confidence. Something fundamental in her tone, not pleading, not desperate, but coldly certain and completely controlled, made everyone present pause in their tracks. Michael, who had been gesturing dramatically to security guards, stopped mid-motion. The guards who had been preparing to physically remove the twins from the aircraft hesitated uncertainly. Other passengers pressed closer, sensing that the power dynamic was about to shift in ways no one had anticipated, because for the first time all day, Amara Jackson sounded exactly like someone who possessed real, substantial, and potentially devastating power. Dad, Amara said when the call connected, her voice carrying across the jet bridge with crystal clarity and absolute confidence. "We're at Miami Executive Airport, and Meridian Aviation is refusing to honor our legitimate charter booking. We need your immediate assistance and intervention." The voice that responded through the phone speaker was calm, measured, and carried the unmistakable authority of someone who was accustomed to being obeyed immediately and without question by powerful people in positions of significant responsibility. "Amara, sweetheart, tell me exactly what's happening there. Take your time and give me every detail." Michael tried desperately to interrupt the conversation and regain control of the rapidly deteriorating situation. "Miss, you cannot make personal phone calls on the jet bridge during active boarding procedures. This is a violation of federal aviation regulations." And Mr. Lawson, the voice from the phone, cut him off with surgical precision and ice-cold authority. "This is Dominic Jackson. You will not interrupt my daughter again, and you will not make any further attempts to intimidate or silence her." The blood drained completely from Michael's face as the implications of that name hit him like a physical blow. Dominic Jackson wasn't just any concerned parent making empty threats. He was Meridian Aviation's owner, CEO, and the man who signed Michael's paychecks and had the absolute power to end his career with a single word. The twins looked at each other in genuine surprise and growing amazement. They had always known their father was successful in the aviation industry, but they had never fully understood or appreciated the true extent of his influence, power, and authority within the private aviation sector. At this moment, the mysterious woman in the charcoal suit stepped forward, revealing a company identification badge that had been hidden beneath her blazer. "Mr. Jackson," she said into her own phone. "Catherine Reynolds, Internal Affairs. I've been monitoring the situation as you instructed. The discrimination has been comprehensive and coordinated just as you suspected from the reports." A wave of shocked murmurs spread through the onlookers. The revelation that an internal investigator had been witnessing and documenting everything changed the entire context of the unfolding drama. Now Dominic continued, his voice carrying across the jet bridge for everyone present to hear clearly. "I want you to listen very carefully to what my daughters are about to tell you about their experience today, because what you and your colleagues have done isn't just morally wrong and legally questionable. It's about to cost Meridian Aviation everything it has worked to build." The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. Security guards stepped back uncertainly, suddenly realizing they might be on the wrong side of a situation that was spiraling far beyond their understanding or control. Michael looked like a man watching his entire career collapse in real time. Other passengers pressed even closer, sensing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Captain James Harrington, who had been monitoring the situation from the cockpit, emerged with obvious concern and growing panic as he began to understand the magnitude of what was unfolding. Mr. Jackson Harrington said, his voice shaking slightly as he tried to salvage an increasingly impossible situation. "I'm Captain Harrington. I'm sure we can resolve any misunderstandings quickly and professionally. There may have been some communication errors or procedural confusion." Captain Harrington. Dominic's voice turned even colder and more dangerous. "There have been no misunderstandings or communication errors. What has happened here today is coordinated, deliberate, and documented racial discrimination against my daughters by multiple employees of my company. They have been harassed, humiliated, and threatened with arrest for the crime of attempting to use a charter service that was legitimately purchased and properly confirmed." Dominic's words hit like hammer blows, each accusation more damning than the last. The scope of what had occurred was becoming clear, not just to the immediate participants, but to everyone within hearing distance. Amara Naomi Dominic said, his voice softening when he addressed his daughters directly. "I need you to stay exactly where you are and continue documenting everything that happens. Don't move from that location. Don't accept any offers or compromises from airline staff, and keep recording every interaction. I'm implementing Emergency Protocol Delta immediately." The twins exchanged confused glances, having never heard of such a protocol in all their years of listening to their father discuss business matters. "What's Protocol Delta?" Dad Naomi asked with genuine curiosity. "You'll understand in approximately 2 minutes," Dominic replied with grim satisfaction and barely controlled anger. "Every single person who treated you like criminals today is about to learn exactly why I kept my ownership of this company private, and why that was the biggest mistake they could possibly have made." Throughout the terminal, departure boards began flickering ominously with updates that would send shockwaves through the entire private aviation industry. Charter after charter, flight after flight, began showing the same unprecedented status. Delayed. Operational review required. "What's happening to all the flights?" someone in the crowd asked with growing alarm. Dominic's voice carried a tone of grim satisfaction mixed with righteous anger as he explained the scope of his response. Emergency Protocol Delta means that every single Meridian Aviation aircraft currently on the tarmac at gates or in preparation for departure is being immediately grounded, pending a comprehensive investigation into discriminatory practices and coordinated civil rights violations. No Meridian Aviation aircraft will move until I am personally satisfied that this company deserves to operate. Ethan Winters could barely contain his professional excitement. This was no longer just a story about discrimination. It was now a major business crisis with significant economic and social implications. He had just witnessed the moment when a company's hidden culture of bias collided with the one thing more powerful than entrenched discrimination: ownership accountability. Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone who was being mistreated suddenly revealed unexpected power or authority? Share your story below. The magnitude of Dominic Jackson's response left everyone speechless and struggling to comprehend what they were witnessing. Michael Lawson, who moments before had been aggressively confronting two teenagers with the confidence of someone who held all the power, now looked like a man facing his own professional execution. Sir Captain Harrington said carefully, his voice trembling as he tried to grasp the full implications of what was happening. Surely this is an extreme overreaction to what amounts to customer service miscommunications. Grounding our entire fleet will cost millions of dollars and strand hundreds of clients across the country. Captain Harrington. Dominic's voice carried deadly calm and absolute authority. There have been no customer service miscommunications. What has occurred here is coordinated racial discrimination captured on multiple security cameras witnessed by dozens of people and documented by my daughters in real time. More importantly, this represents a pattern of behavior that I now realize has been festering within my company for years, while I trusted others to maintain the standards of dignity and respect that should define every client interaction. The implications were staggering and went far beyond the immediate situation. Dominic wasn't just responding to his daughter's treatment. He was acknowledging that their experience had revealed entrenched problems that demanded comprehensive investigation and radical transformation. Other clients throughout the terminal were now openly staring and recording, many live streaming the confrontation as word spread rapidly through social media about what was unfolding at Miami Executive Airport. The hashtag #Meridian Discrimination was already beginning to trend as the story spread far beyond the confines of the private aviation terminal. Ryan Whitfield, the ground operations supervisor who had started the entire ordeal by canceling the twins' legitimate charter, appeared at the jet bridge with obvious panic and desperation written across his face. "Mr. Jackson," he said breathlessly, "I'm Ryan Whitfield from ground operations. If there were any errors in processing today, I'm sure we can resolve them immediately and get your daughters on their way without any further delays, Mr. Whitfield." Dominic replied with ice in his voice. "You personally told my daughters that certain people need to understand that private aviation isn't for everyone. You canceled their legitimate charter without justification, accused them of fraud, and suggested they should be grateful that commercial airlines exist for people in their situation. Would you like to explain exactly what you meant by those comments?" Ryan's face went white as he realized that every discriminatory word he had spoken was being quoted back to him verbatim, apparently from detailed records that had been maintained throughout the day. "Sir, I think there may have been some misunderstanding about my comments. I was simply following standard verification procedures." "Mr. Whitfield." Dominic cut him off ruthlessly. "My daughters have recordings of your exact words. Security cameras captured your behavior, and multiple witnesses observed your discriminatory actions. There was no misunderstanding. There was deliberate, coordinated racism directed at paying customers, because you made assumptions based entirely on their race and age." Ryan took a small, involuntary step backward, his carefully constructed professional facade crumbling as the reality of his actions caught up with him. For a brief moment, genuine shame flashed across his features, perhaps the first honest emotion he'd displayed all day. I didn't think of it that way," he stammered, his voice barely audible. "I was just doing what everyone does with—" He trailed off suddenly, aware that completing that thought would only make his situation worse. Thomas Burke, the security agent who had subjected the twins to invasive and unnecessary searches, appeared next, his face flushed with the dawning realization that his career was in serious jeopardy. "Mr. Jackson, I want to clarify that all security procedures were conducted according to standard protocols and federal regulations," he said desperately. "Mr. Burke," Dominic replied with barely controlled fury, "you subjected my daughters to invasive searches that violated their privacy and dignity, examined their personal electronics without legal authority, and made public comments about being extra careful with these types. and you then attempted to prevent witnesses from documenting your discriminatory behavior, which federal regulations authorize racial profiling and illegal searches based on skin color. The question hung in the air unanswered because everyone present knew that no such regulations existed. Burke's confident posture deflated visibly. His gaze darted around the crowded jet bridge, searching for allies or escape routes, and finding neither. Like Ryan before him, he seemed to be confronting the reality of his actions for perhaps the first time, seeing them not as standard procedure, but as the discriminatory behaviors they truly were. Andrea Mercer and Gabriel Thompson from the Sky Lounge Cafe had also arrived, both looking increasingly panicked as they began to understand the scope of what they had become involved in. Mr. Jackson Gabriel began nervously. "If there were any issues with service at our establishment, I assure you they will be addressed immediately through our standard complaint resolution procedures. Mr. Thompson?" Dominic's voice was now openly hostile. "You personally told my daughters they weren't welcome in your establishment, seated other customers ahead of them despite their earlier arrival, and instructed your staff not to assist them. When a server attempted to help you, explicitly told her to stay away from my daughters. This wasn't a service issue. This was coordinated exclusion based on race." Gabriel's professional mask slipped completely, revealing the fear beneath. Unlike Ryan and Burke, he made no attempt to justify his actions. The evidence was too overwhelming, the situation too far gone for plausible deniability, as each employee was confronted with the evidence of their discriminatory behavior. The scope of what had occurred became increasingly clear. This wasn't a series of isolated incidents or unfortunate misunderstandings. It was a coordinated pattern of discrimination that had been accepted as normal operating procedure, but the most devastating revelation was yet to come. Furthermore, Dominic continued relentlessly. "I have spent the last 2 hours reviewing security footage, customer service records, and employee communications from today's events. What I've discovered is that this coordinated discrimination against my daughters was not an aberration. It was entirely consistent with how this company has been treating minority customers for years, while I trusted others to maintain our standards." The words hit like a nuclear explosion. Dominic Jackson wasn't just angry about his daughter's treatment. He was acknowledging that their experience had exposed a corporate culture that had completely failed the very principles he thought he had established. Catherine Reynolds stepped forward again, her tablet displaying a series of graphs and statistics. "Mr. Jackson, our preliminary analysis shows a statistically significant pattern of disparate treatment across multiple service metrics. Minority customers experience 42% longer wait times, 67% more document verification procedures, and 89% more security challenges than white customers with identical booking profiles." The clinical precision of these numbers somehow made the discrimination even more shocking, reducing the human impact to cold statistics that nonetheless painted an undeniable picture of coordinated bias. Within hours of Dominic Jackson's emergency protocol, Delta implementation, Miami Executive Airport had transformed into the epicenter of a rapidly expanding national conversation about discrimination in the aviation industry. News crews, civil rights advocates, and federal investigators descended on the facility as the story of 2 black teenagers being repeatedly discriminated against by employees of their father's own company captured headlines across the country. Among the journalists who flocked to the scene, Ethan Winters had a unique advantage. He had witnessed the entire sequence of events firsthand. While other reporters struggled to piece together what had happened from second-hand accounts and official statements, Ethan had documentation of the systematic discrimination from check-in to boarding. "I was there from almost the beginning," he explained to his editor over the phone. This wasn't just a one-off incident or a misunderstanding. It was methodical, persistent discrimination at every level, and the company's owner witnessed it happening to his own daughters. The twins, still standing on the jet bridge where the confrontation had reached its climax, found themselves surrounded by a growing crowd of supporters, witnesses and investigators who were documenting every detail of what had transpired. Their phones had become repositories of evidence that would prove crucial in the comprehensive investigation that was already beginning. Dominic arrived at the airport in person within 2 hours, accompanied by a formidable team of civil rights attorneys, corporate investigators, federal compliance experts, and public relations specialists, who immediately began the complex process of documenting the coordinated discrimination and implementing comprehensive reforms. When he walked into the terminal where his daughters were waiting, the reunion was both deeply emotional and profoundly powerful. The man who had just paralyzed an entire aviation company to defend his children's dignity embraced them with the fierce protectiveness of a parent who would stop at nothing to ensure justice. Dad, Amara said as she hugged him tightly, "We're sorry we disrupted your meetings and caused such a massive crisis for the company." Dominic's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he held his daughters close, his usual composed demeanor cracking to reveal the raw emotion beneath. For a moment, he wasn't the powerful CEO who had just grounded an entire fleet of aircraft. He was simply a father confronting the pain his children had endured. Sweetheart Dominic replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't disrupt anything or cause any crisis. You exposed something that desperately needed to be exposed, and I'm incredibly proud of how you conducted yourselves with dignity and courage throughout this ordeal. The crisis was already here. You just forced us to confront it honestly." He pulled back slightly, looking each of his daughters in the eye. "I've spent my entire career building this company believing I was creating something different, something better. But I failed to see what was happening right under my nose. When I was your age, I experienced the exact same kind of discrimination you faced today. I swore then that if I ever had the power to change things, I would. And now, thanks to you both, I have that chance." The twins had rarely seen their father so emotionally open, so vulnerable. His admission of his own past experiences and his failure to prevent theirs created a powerful moment of connection amid the chaos of the unfolding investigation. The investigation that followed was swift, comprehensive, and devastating in its findings. Security camera footage confirmed every detail of the twins' account with crystal clarity. Digital records proved that their charter had been legitimately booked and paid for without any payment issues whatsoever. Audio recordings captured every discriminatory comment, every false accusation, and every attempt to intimidate or silence them. But the investigation revealed something even more troubling than the immediate incidents. This wasn't an isolated case of individual prejudice, but rather a coordinated pattern of discriminatory behavior that had been affecting minority customers for years. Mr. Jackson reported Maria Gonzalez, the lead civil rights investigator. Our preliminary review has uncovered a documented pattern of discriminatory behavior affecting at least 80 customers over the past 3 years. Minority clients were routinely subjected to additional scrutiny, questioned about their ability to afford services, and in numerous cases denied service entirely based on employee assumptions about their legitimacy as customers. Dominic's jaw tightened with anger and profound disappointment as he reviewed the mounting evidence. "How many customers are we talking about in total, and how extensive was the coordinated nature of this discrimination?" Based on customer service complaints, security footage, and employee communications we've reviewed so far, we're looking at potentially over 100 documented cases of discriminatory treatment, with the actual number likely being significantly higher due to underreporting. The discrimination appears to have been not only coordinated, but actively encouraged by middle management, who viewed certain demographic groups as inherently suspicious or illegitimate customers. The scope of the problem was staggering and went far beyond anything Dominic had imagined possible within his own company. The corporate culture he thought he had established had been completely undermined by employees who felt entitled to discriminate based on their personal prejudices. As the shock of what had occurred began to settle, a temporary operations center was established in a private conference room at the terminal. Dominic sat at the head of a long table surrounded by his executive team, legal advisors, and civil rights specialists. In the corner, Amara and Naomi sat quietly still, processing the magnitude of what their experience had revealed. How did we let this happen? Dominic asked the question directed more to himself than anyone in the room. How did I let this happen? His fingers traced the worn edges of a small framed photograph he kept in his wallet himself at 19, standing proudly beside his first job in aviation, a maintenance position he'd secured despite being told repeatedly that people like him weren't suited for the industry. The contrast between his youthful optimism then and the harsh realities his daughters had faced today weighed heavily on him. Maria Gonzalez, who had been studying the preliminary findings of her investigation, looked up from her tablet. Mr. Jackson, what we're seeing here is unfortunately quite common in many industries. Companies establish formal policies prohibiting discrimination, but without proper oversight and accountability. Informal discriminatory practices often develop and become normalized over time. Your daughters exposed a gap between your stated values and the actual culture that had developed within your organization. Dominic nodded slowly, his expression grave. Well, that gap closes today. Effective immediately, I'm establishing a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior of any kind. I want a comprehensive review of every employee involved in today's incidents, and I want termination proceedings initiated for anyone who participated in or facilitated discrimination against my daughters or any other customer. His executive team nodded in somber agreement, many of them visibly shaken by the day's revelations. They had prided themselves on running what they believed was an inclusive, progressive organization, only to discover that beneath the surface lay a culture of entrenched bias and discrimination. What about the stranded passengers? Asked Jonathan Foster, Meridian's chief operations officer. We have clients at airports across the country who are being affected by Protocol Delta. I've already authorized emergency arrangements with our competitor airlines to accommodate any stranded clients at our expense. Dominic replied firmly. But no Meridian aircraft takes off until we've addressed this crisis. Our reputation may take a hit in the short term, but our integrity is non-negotiable. From the far end of the table, a distinguished older man with silver hair cleared his throat. Dominic, may I speak candidly? Harold Winters, the company's longest-serving board member and chief financial advisor, looked deeply troubled. What you're proposing could cost us upwards of $50 million in immediate losses, not to mention the long-term damage to our reputation with our core clientele. While I completely condemn what happened to your daughters, we have a fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders. A tense silence fell over the room. Harold was not known for racial prejudice. In fact, he had been an early supporter of diversity initiatives, but his concern for the company's financial well-being was genuine. Dominic met the older man's gaze steadily. Harold, I've always respected your financial acumen, and I know you're speaking from concern for the business we've built. But I need you to understand something. This isn't just about my daughters, though that would be reason enough. This is about the very soul of our company, what we claim to stand for versus what we actually practice. If we don't address this now completely and transparently, we won't have a company worth saving. Harold wasn't easily convinced. I'm simply suggesting a more measured approach, perhaps a targeted investigation focused on the Miami terminal policy revisions, sensitivity training. And if it were your granddaughters who had been humiliated today? Dominic asked quietly. The older man fell silent, his objections faltering in the face of that personal framing. After a moment, he nodded slowly. Point taken. But we'll need a solid plan to explain this to shareholders. I believe doing the right thing is ultimately the best business decision we could make, Dominic replied. And I'm staking my entire company on that belief. He turned to his daughters, his expression softening with pride. Amara, Naomi, I want you both to be part of this process if you're willing. Your perspective and experience are invaluable, and I think it's important that you see how we respond to what happened today. Amara and Naomi exchanged glances, then nodded in unison. "We want to help," Amara said quietly. "Not just for us, but for everyone who's been treated this way and didn't have the power to fight back." As the day wore on, the scope of the response continued to expand. Civil rights organizations issued statements of support for the decisive action taken by Dominic Jackson. Social media buzzed with commentary, much of it praising the twins for their courage and dignity in the face of relentless discrimination. Legal experts began discussions about the broader implications for the private aviation industry as a whole. By nightfall, the first formal disciplinary hearings were already underway, starting with the employees who had been most directly involved in discriminating against the twins. Each hearing was conducted with meticulous attention to due process and fairness values that Dominic insisted must characterize every aspect of the company's response. Have you ever witnessed someone take a bold stand against injustice? Share your story in the comments below. Ryan Whitfield, the ground operations supervisor who had initiated the twins' ordeal, was among the first to face consequences. His attempt to provide a defensive explanation during his disciplinary hearing only made his situation worse. "Mr. Jackson, I want you to understand that I was simply following procedures that I believed were in the company's best interests," he said desperately. "When I saw two teenagers with a high-value charter, I thought it was my responsibility to verify their legitimacy more carefully. Mr. Whitfield." Dominic replied with cold precision, "You didn't verify anything more carefully. You made assumptions based entirely on their race and age, canceled their legitimate charter without justification, and when confronted with evidence of their legitimacy, you suggested they should be grateful for commercial airline options. That wasn't following procedures. That was implementing your personal prejudices as company policy." Ryan's shoulders slumped as the weight of his actions finally settled on him. For the first time, a flicker of genuine remorse crossed his features. He glanced at the evidence folder before him, transcripts of his own words, footage of his behavior, statistics showing his pattern of treating minority customers differently. "I never thought of myself as prejudiced," he said quietly, the words halting as they forced their way out. "I always thought I was just being thorough professional, but seeing it laid out like this," he gestured helplessly at the evidence before him. "I don't even recognize the person in these reports, or maybe I just never wanted to see him." Thomas Burke's disciplinary hearing was equally damning. His attempts to justify the invasive searches and discriminatory treatment fell apart under scrutiny. Sir, enhanced security screening is sometimes necessary when dealing with unusual situations or suspicious behavior, he claimed weakly. Mr. Burke Dominic responded what was suspicious about two well-dressed honor students with proper identification and legitimate charter confirmations. What behavior did they exhibit that justified invasive searches, examination of their personal electronics, and public commentary about being extra careful with these types? The only unusual thing about the situation was your decision to treat them differently based on their appearance. Burke shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his confidence eroding as each justification was methodically dismantled. Unlike Ryan, he struggled to acknowledge the discriminatory nature of his actions, clinging desperately to the fiction that his behavior had been motivated by security concerns rather than bias. "I was trained to look for certain indicators," he insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "Statistical patterns. Behavioral markers. So, show me the statistical patterns that justified your treatment of my daughters," Dominic challenged. "Show me the behavioral markers they exhibited that warranted such scrutiny." Burke's silence was answer enough. Captain James Harrington's hearing revealed the depth of institutional bias that had infected the company's operations. His defense was perhaps the most revealing of all. "Mr. Jackson, in my 15 years with this company, I've always tried to maintain the highest standards of safety and security. Sometimes that requires making difficult judgment calls about passenger legitimacy," he said, apparently believing this somehow justified his actions. "Captain Harrington, Dominic replied with barely controlled fury. You made no judgment calls about passenger legitimacy. You participated in coordinated harassment of legitimate customers, created false security alerts to justify discrimination, and threatened to have them arrested for questioning your unprofessional behavior. Your 15 years of experience apparently taught you nothing about treating all customers with equal dignity and respect. Harrington's face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. Unlike the others, he showed little remorse, instead doubling down on his belief that he had been justified in his actions. With all due respect, sir, maintaining order and authority is essential in aviation. When passengers question our decisions, it undermines the entire system. Dominic leaned forward, his voice dangerously quiet. Is that what you think happened today? That my daughters undermined the system by expecting to be treated with basic human dignity, by requesting that their legitimate booking be honored, by asking why they were being subjected to different standards than every other passenger? Harrington had no answer, his expression hardening into defiant silence. But perhaps the most disappointing disciplinary hearing involved Vanessa Rodriguez, the Hispanic supervisor, whose betrayal had been particularly painful for the twins to experience. Mr. Jackson, she said during her hearing, her composed exterior beginning to crack under the weight of evidence against her. I've worked incredibly hard to reach my position in this company, and I've always tried to maintain professional standards and avoid any appearance of favoritism or special treatment. No, Miss Rodriguez, Dominic replied with profound sadness. You didn't avoid favoritism. You implemented coordinated discrimination against people who looked different from you in order to protect your position within a biased system. Instead of using your authority to ensure equal treatment, you became complicit in perpetuating the very prejudices that undoubtedly affected your own career advancement. Vanessa flinched at his words, her carefully maintained professional facade crumbling completely. Tears welled in her eyes. Not the manipulative tears of someone caught and trying to evade consequences, but the painful recognition of a truth she had spent years denying to herself. You don't understand what it's like, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I had to work twice as hard, be twice as perfect just to be accepted. I couldn't afford to be seen as playing the race card or showing favoritism to other minorities. I thought if I just enforced the rules perfectly exactly as my white colleagues did, I'd be respected, I'd advance. She wiped at her eyes angrily. But you're right. I became the very thing I hated. I saw those girls, I knew exactly what was happening to them, and I chose to protect my position instead of doing what was right. I've been compromising so long I forgot who I was supposed to be. Her raw honesty shifted the atmosphere in the room. This wasn't just about one day's discrimination. It was about the complex, insidious ways that biased systems perpetuate themselves, co-opting even those who should be natural allies in the fight against prejudice. The consequences for the employees involved were swift and decisive. But Dominic's response went far beyond individual punishment. As the initial disciplinary hearings concluded, Maria Gonzalez's investigation team continued to uncover evidence of widespread discriminatory practices throughout the company. Each revelation added new depth to the emerging picture of a corporate culture that had systematically failed to live up to its stated values. Mr. Jackson. Maria reported during an emergency executive briefing, we've found evidence of coded language in employee communications that was used to flag minority customers for additional scrutiny. Terms like non-standard client, verification required, and profile review needed were consistently applied to Black, Hispanic, and Middle Eastern customers regardless of their actual status or booking legitimacy. She displayed a series of internal emails on the conference room screen highlighting the patterns of communication that had enabled discrimination while maintaining plausible deniability. The language was carefully calibrated to avoid explicitly racist terminology while accomplishing the same discriminatory outcome. Dominic shook his head in disbelief. And this was happening company-wide, not just at the Miami terminal. I'm afraid so. Maria confirmed. We've found similar patterns at most of our major terminals. The Miami location appears to have been particularly problematic, but the issue extends throughout the organization. What's most concerning is that we've found evidence that complaints about discrimination were systematically downplayed, ignored, or outright buried by middle management. She pulled up another series of documents showing customer complaints that had been filed and subsequently dismissed without investigation. The pattern was unmistakable. Minority customers who raised concerns about disparate treatment were consistently labeled as difficult, unreasonable, or looking for special treatment. Jonathan Foster, who had been reviewing financial data, looked up from his laptop with a grim expression. There's more, Dominic. We've been running the numbers, and there's a clear financial impact to this discriminatory behavior. Over the past 3 years, we've lost an estimated $15 million in revenue from minority clients who were turned away discouraged from booking, or who simply stopped using our services after negative experiences. He displayed a chart showing a steady decline in diversity among Meridian's clientele over time, a trend that had been masked in overall revenue reports by growth in other market segments. It gets worse, he continued. Our client retention rates for minority customers are 37% lower than for white customers with identical usage patterns. When we lose these clients, we're not just losing their immediate business, we're losing lifetime value referrals and market share in growing demographic segments. Harold Winters, who had been silently reviewing the data, looked up with a changed expression. The financial evidence seemed to have affected him more deeply than the moral arguments. This is financially indefensible, he said slowly. We've been systematically turning away profitable business based on nothing but prejudice. Exactly, Dominic replied. Discrimination isn't just morally wrong, it's bad business. We've been leaving millions on the table while alienating a growing segment of potential clients. The room fell silent as the executives absorbed the implications of that figure. Not only had discrimination caused immeasurable harm to countless customers, but it had also been terrible for business. So Dominic said quietly, "We've been allowing a culture of discrimination to flourish that violates our core values, harms innocent people, and costs us millions in lost revenue. And it took my own daughters being humiliated for us to discover it." He stood up, his decision made. "This ends now. I want a complete overhaul of our corporate culture top to bottom. New policies, new training, new accountability systems, whatever it takes to ensure this never happens again." Outside the Meridian Aviation headquarters, a crowd had begun to gather. What had started as a small group of protesters with hastily made signs had swelled into hundreds of people. Civil rights activists, community members, and individuals who had experienced similar discrimination but had never had the power to challenge it effectively. They carried signs reading "Fly Equal Justice in the Skies" and "Accountability Now." Local news crews captured footage of the growing demonstration as speakers took turns sharing their own experiences of discrimination in various industries. The peaceful but powerful protest was creating a visual manifestation of the widespread support for Dominic Jackson's decisive action. When word of the protest reached the executive conference room, Harold Winters peered through the window with concern. "This is becoming a public relations nightmare," he muttered. But Catherine Reynolds saw it differently. "Actually, this gives us an opportunity," she said thoughtfully. "These people aren't our enemies. They're potential allies in the transformation. What if we invited community leaders to join our accountability council? What if we made this reform process transparent and collaborative, rather than defensive?" Dominic nodded slowly, a new strategy forming. "Catherine's right. We need to reframe this entirely, not as a company under siege, but as an organization committed to genuine transformation in partnership with the communities we serve." Within hours, Dominic had arranged for representatives from civil rights organizations to meet with the executive team, rather than traditional crisis management focused on damage control. Meridian Aviation was embracing radical transparency and community involvement in its reform process. As word of Meridian's crisis spread throughout the industry, competitors watched with a mixture of concern and self-reflection. Many recognized that the issues being exposed at Meridian were likely present in their own organizations as well. Some saw an opportunity to distance themselves from such practices, while others began quiet internal reviews to identify potential problems before they faced similar public scrutiny. The Federal Aviation Administration announced a formal investigation into discriminatory practices in the private aviation sector, with Meridian's case serving as a catalyst for broader regulatory attention. Civil rights organizations that had long documented discrimination in commercial air travel now turned their focus to the largely unexamined world of private aviation. Media coverage of the incident expanded beyond the initial viral videos to include in-depth reporting on the structural issues that enabled such discrimination to flourish. Major news networks ran special segments examining the intersection of race wealth and access in luxury travel services. Ethan Winters published a comprehensive feature in the Miami Chronicle titled "First-Class Discrimination Inside the Exclusive World of Private Aviation." The article, which featured interviews with the Jackson twins and detailed their ordeal, quickly went viral and was picked up by national publications. Ethan's first-hand account provided a compelling narrative that transcended typical news coverage. What made the Jackson incident so powerful, Ethan wrote, wasn't just the blatant discrimination they faced, but the rare opportunity to see what happens when those with power choose accountability over cover-up. In grounding his entire fleet, Dominic Jackson prioritized justice over profits, integrity over convenience, and long-term transformation over short-term damage control. A prominent national newspaper published an investigative piece titled "Flying While Black: The Hidden Barriers in Private Aviation," featuring interviews with minority executives who shared similar experiences of discrimination despite their professional status and financial resources. The article cited the Jackson incident as a tipping point that had finally brought attention to a long-standing problem. Corporate clients of Meridian Aviation found themselves facing difficult decisions. Some immediately suspended their contracts, unwilling to be associated with an organization under scrutiny for discriminatory practices. Others, particularly those with strong diversity and inclusion commitments themselves, issued statements of support for Dominic Jackson's decisive response, while making clear their expectations for meaningful reform. Amidst this swirling controversy, Amara and Naomi Jackson found themselves unexpectedly thrust into the spotlight. Their poised, dignified response to discrimination had resonated with millions of people who had experienced similar treatment but lacked the power or platform to challenge it effectively. "We never wanted to be the face of this issue," Amara told her father as they reviewed media requests for interviews that had begun flooding in. "We just wanted to go to our college interviews." Dominic put his arm around her shoulders. "I know, sweetheart, and you still will. But what happened to you has opened a lot of people's eyes, including mine. Sometimes the most important change comes from the most unexpected moments." Naomi, who had been scrolling through social media on her phone, looked up with wide eyes. "Dad, you should see this. People are sharing their own stories of discrimination using #Meridian discrimination, but it's not just about our company anymore. It's becoming a platform for people to talk about discrimination in all kinds of luxury services." Dominic nodded thoughtfully. "That's exactly why this response has to be about more than just fixing Meridian. We have an opportunity and a responsibility to help transform an entire industry." The impact was already spreading beyond aviation. Luxury hotels, high-end restaurants, exclusive retail establishments, and other premium service providers began conducting their own internal reviews, recognizing that they might harbor similar discriminatory practices. Several industry leaders reached out to Dominic Jackson for guidance on implementing what was beginning to be called the Meridian model of accountability and reform. As the initial shock began to subside, the focus shifted to the monumental task of rebuilding Meridian Aviation from the inside out. Dominic assembled a diverse team of experts in corporate culture transformation, civil rights compliance, and ethical leadership to design a comprehensive reform strategy. The first step was a company-wide stand-down with all operations paused for mandatory training and reflection sessions. Every employee, from executives to ground staff, participated in frank discussions about bias discrimination and the company's renewed commitment to equal treatment for all customers. These sessions were often uncomfortable, revealing deeply ingrained attitudes and assumptions that many employees had never been forced to examine before. Some resisted, arguing that increased scrutiny of certain customers was simply good business practice or necessary security. These objections were met with clear evidence from Maria Gonzalez's investigation team, showing that discriminatory treatment had never improved security or business outcomes. In fact, quite the opposite. Others embraced the opportunity for growth and change, sharing their own experiences of witnessing discrimination, but feeling powerless to address it within the existing corporate culture. Isabella Ramirez, the cafe server who had slipped her contact information to the twins, emerged as a powerful voice for frontline employees who wanted to do better but had been constrained by management directives. I saw it happening every day, she testified during a company forum. Not just to customers, but to colleagues too. People of color being passed over for promotions, receiving harsher discipline for minor infractions being assigned to less desirable shifts. I tried to speak up a few times, but I was always told to stay in my lane or that I was being too sensitive. After a while, you start to believe maybe it's just how things are. Her testimony struck a chord with many employees who had similar experiences but had never felt safe enough to share them. What began as a crisis response to a specific incident gradually evolved into something more profound. A fundamental re-examination of the company's values, practices, and culture. Meanwhile, the twins' story continued to resonate far beyond Meridian Aviation. They received thousands of messages from people sharing similar experiences and expressing gratitude for their courage in standing up to discrimination. Civil rights organizations reached out to invite them to speak at events and conferences. Educational institutions asked to use their experience as a case study in business ethics courses. Through it all, Amara and Naomi maintained the same dignity and poise that had characterized their response throughout the ordeal. They redirected attention from themselves to the broader issues of equality and justice, using their unexpected platform to advocate for meaningful change rather than personal recognition. "We're just two students who wanted to go to our college interviews," Naomi told Ethan Winters in a follow-up interview for the Miami Chronicle. The real story here is about all the people who face this kind of treatment every day without having a father who can ground an entire fleet of private jets to defend them. Those are the people we should be talking about. Ethan's article, which emphasized this perspective, helped shift the narrative from a sensational story about privileged teens to a more profound examination of systemic discrimination and the courage required to challenge it. As the disciplinary hearings continued, an unexpected pattern began to emerge. Many of the employees facing consequences expressed not just regret for their actions, but genuine shock at having their behavior labeled as discriminatory. They had become so accustomed to the biased culture within Meridian that they had lost the ability to recognize their own prejudiced behavior. Ryan Whitfield, sitting in a follow-up interview with Maria Gonzalez after his termination, appeared genuinely confused. "I don't understand how what I did was racist," he said. "I was just being cautious with unusual clients. I would have done the same with any teenagers trying to use expensive services." Maria pulled out a thick folder of documentation. "Mr. Whitfield, we've reviewed your handling of over 200 client interactions over the past year. In that time, you processed 17 white teenagers using high-value charters, most of them children of wealthy clients. In every single case, you processed their documentation in under 5 minutes with no additional verification. Yet every single minority client, regardless of age, was subjected to additional scrutiny. The data doesn't support your claim that this was about age rather than race. She showed him a series of graphs clearly illustrating the disparity in his treatment of different demographic groups. Ryan stared at the evidence, his face reflecting dawning horror as he was forced to confront the pattern of his own behavior. I didn't realize," he stammered. "I honestly didn't see the pattern." "That's precisely the problem," Maria replied. "Bias often operates below the level of conscious awareness. That's why organizations need robust systems to identify and correct these patterns before they harm people." This dynamic repeated itself in interview after interview, revealing the insidious nature of the discriminatory culture that had developed within Meridian. Most employees didn't think of themselves as prejudiced or discriminatory, yet their actions consistently reflected biased assumptions and unequal treatment based on race. As the scope of the problem became increasingly clear, Dominic Jackson faced difficult questions about his own responsibility as the company's owner and CEO. How had he remained unaware of such widespread discrimination within his organization? What oversight mechanisms had failed? And how could he ensure that the reforms now being implemented would create lasting change rather than superficial compliance? These questions would guide the most ambitious corporate transformation in Meridian Aviation's history. If you've ever had to confront your own unconscious biases, share your experience below. Your honesty could help others on their journey. 6 months after the incident that had grounded Meridian Aviation's entire fleet, the company bore little resemblance to its former self. The transformation hadn't been easy, comfortable, or inexpensive. Changing a corporate culture that had enabled coordinated discrimination for years required more than policy changes and training videos. It demanded a fundamental reconstruction of how the company viewed its relationship with customers, employees, and the broader community it served. The Accountability and Justice Council that Dominic had created was meeting in Meridian Aviation's renovated Miami training facility, a diverse group of 25 people tasked with redesigning the company's approach to customer service, employee relations, and corporate responsibility. The council included civil rights experts, customer service specialists, former victims of discrimination, community leaders, and, most surprisingly to some observers, several of the employees who had discriminated against the twins. Ryan Whitfield sat uncomfortably at the polished conference table, listening with growing understanding and shame as Isabella Ramirez described the psychological impact of workplace discrimination on employees who witnessed it but felt powerless to intervene effectively. Every single time I saw Gabriel make racist comments about customers or watched colleagues treat minority clients differently, I felt like I was dying inside a little bit more, Isabella explained with painful honesty. But I desperately needed my job to support my family, and I was terrified of the consequences if I spoke up. So I stayed quiet, hated myself for my cowardice, and became complicit in a system I knew was fundamentally wrong. Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his seat as her words hit home. 6 months of intensive workshops, sensitivity training, and victim impact testimonials had forced him to confront patterns in his own behavior that he had previously rationalized away as normal business practices. The training hadn't been just about learning new policies and procedures. It had been about understanding the profound human impact of his discriminatory actions and developing genuine empathy for the people he had harmed. His journey hadn't been smooth or immediate. At first, he had resisted fiercely, clinging to justifications and deflections. He had quit twice during the process, only to return driven by a growing need to understand how he had become part of a discriminatory system. There had been moments of backsliding defensiveness and denial as he grappled with the painful recognition of his own prejudice. "I never thought of myself as a racist person," Ryan admitted during one particularly difficult and emotionally charged session. "I convinced myself that I was just doing my job professionally and following standard verification procedures. But listening to all these stories and testimonials, I realize now that I was creating different standards and procedures for different people based entirely on assumptions and stereotypes I didn't even consciously acknowledge I was making." He paused, gathering his thoughts. The hardest part wasn't losing my job or facing public criticism. It was realizing that I'd spent my entire career thinking of myself as one of the good ones, while actively causing harm to people who did nothing wrong except look different from me. That's something I have to live with now. Thomas Burke's transformation had been even more dramatic and comprehensive. The security agent who had subjected the twins to invasive and humiliating searches was now working directly with federal authorities and civil rights organizations to identify and eliminate patterns of discriminatory profiling in airport security procedures nationwide. I convinced myself that enhanced screening of certain passengers was keeping everyone safer and was justified by security concerns, he said during a recorded interview, that would become part of Meridian Aviation's comprehensive training materials. But when I honestly examined my decision-making process and the data on actual security threats, I realized I was screening people based on stereotypes and prejudices, not legitimate security indicators. I was making everyone less safe by wasting time and resources on discriminatory practices instead of focusing on real security concerns. His awakening had been catalyzed by a meeting with security experts who presented data showing that his biased approach had actually decreased overall security effectiveness by diverting resources away from evidence-based threat assessment toward demographic profiling. This revelation that his prejudice hadn't even accomplished the security goals he claimed to prioritize had forced him to reconsider everything about his approach to his job. The most profound transformation had occurred in Vanessa Rodriguez, the Hispanic supervisor who had betrayed the twins' expectations by supporting and perpetuating the discriminatory system. Her journey toward understanding and accountability had been the most difficult and emotionally challenging of all the employees involved. Her breakthrough had come during a particularly intense council session when a young black flight attendant described being told by a supervisor to modify her natural hairstyle because it might make some customers uncomfortable or appear unprofessional. I said those exact same words to a new employee just 18 months ago. Vanessa had admitted her voice breaking with emotion and shame. I told myself I was helping her succeed in the corporate world and preparing her for the realities of business. But I was actually perpetuating the same discriminatory system that had forced me to deny and suppress parts of my own identity to be accepted and advanced professionally. For Vanessa, the healing process involved reconnecting with her own history of facing discrimination and acknowledging the ways she had internalized the very biases once directed against her. She had to confront the painful truth that in her struggle to succeed in a biased system, she had become one of its enforcers rather than its reformer. The Council had developed a comprehensive, multifaceted approach to transforming Meridian Aviation's corporate culture. Rather than trying to implement dozens of separate initiatives, they focused on three core pillars of reform. The Equitable Service Platform, ESP, a revolutionary system that combined technology training and accountability to ensure fair treatment for all customers. The platform automatically monitored service metrics across demographic groups, identifying disparities in real time and allowing immediate intervention. Every customer interaction was recorded and analyzed, not just for compliance with policy, but for equity in treatment. The system went beyond simple metrics like wait times to analyze subtleties in language tone and behavior. The Transparency Initiative, a radical approach to accountability that included body cameras for all customer-facing staff, regular public reporting of equity metrics, and an open-door policy for civil rights organizations to conduct unannounced audits. While initially controversial, the initiative had quickly become a source of pride for employees who found that transparency protected them against false accusations while creating powerful incentives for fair treatment. The Community Partnership Program, a collaborative approach that involved community members, former victims of discrimination, and civil rights advocates in ongoing oversight and reform. The program included a diverse external advisory board with real authority community listening sessions in all service areas and scholarships for minority students interested in aviation careers. This streamlined approach had replaced the scattershot collection of diversity trainings, policy revisions, and compliance measures that characterized most corporate responses to discrimination. By focusing on these three core initiatives, Meridian had created a coherent strategy that employees could understand, implement, and embrace. The company's physical environment had also been transformed. Terminal spaces were redesigned to be more welcoming and inclusive, with art and design elements celebrating diversity. Customer service areas were reconfigured to eliminate intimidating barriers, creating more collaborative interactions between staff and clients. Even the company's marketing materials and website were overhauled to reflect the diversity of its clientele and staff. Financial analysts and industry experts had initially predicted disaster for the company, with some forecasting that Meridian Aviation would lose up to 30% of its market value as it diverted resources and attention from operational efficiency to social justice initiatives. Preston Harrington, a former board member who had been forced to resign after attempting to cover up the discrimination, had been particularly vocal in predicting the company's inevitable downfall. "Mark my words," he had told CNBC in an interview shortly after his resignation, "Dominic Jackson is destroying billions in shareholder value to appease the woke mob. No luxury service company can survive while subjecting its wealthy clients to the inconvenience of equity." But something remarkable and unexpected had happened instead. After an initial period of adjustment and some customer turnover, Meridian Aviation's customer satisfaction scores had begun to rise dramatically across all demographic groups. Employee retention had improved significantly, as staff reported feeling more valued, respected, and proud of their workplace environment. The anticipated mass exodus of business customers never materialized. In fact, several major corporations had specifically switched their private aviation contracts to Meridian Aviation, citing the company's ethical leadership and commitment to civil rights as factors that aligned with their own corporate values and social responsibility initiatives. "We're witnessing something that shouldn't be surprising, but unfortunately, as Dominic explained during a board meeting 6 months after the transformation began. When you treat all customers with genuine dignity and respect, regardless of their background. When you create a workplace where all employees feel valued and supported, and when you demonstrate authentic commitment to civil rights and social justice, the entire operation improves dramatically. Discrimination wasn't just morally wrong, it was fundamentally bad business that was poisoning our corporate culture and limiting our growth potential." He displayed a series of quarterly financial reports showing steady improvement across key metrics. Revenue was up 12% compared to the same period last year. Employee turnover had decreased by 34%. Customer acquisition costs had fallen by 22%, as positive word of mouth and media coverage expanded their market without additional advertising expense. Perhaps most significantly, the company's client base had diversified substantially, opening up previously untapped market segments. "The data is clear," Dominic continued. "Our commitment to equity hasn't cost us business, it's generated it. We've experienced 42% growth in our minority client base, expanded into new markets, and strengthened our brand in ways traditional marketing never could." Harold Winters, who had initially expressed concerns about the financial impact of such sweeping reforms, now looked at the numbers with something approaching wonder. "I've never been happier to be proven wrong," he admitted. "It turns out doing the right thing is also the profitable thing. We're not just performing well, we're outperforming our pre-crisis projections." His conversion from skeptic to advocate had been particularly influential with the company's more conservative stakeholders. When the man most concerned with the bottom line became a champion for equity, it sent a powerful message about the business case for justice. Beyond Meridian Aviation, the impact continued to spread. The Meridian model was being adopted across industries, not just in other aviation companies, but in hospitality, finance, retail, and healthcare. Organizations recognized that comprehensive accountability, transparency, and community partnership created not just more equitable outcomes, but better business results. Ethan Winters, whose journalism had helped bring the story to national attention, published a follow-up feature examining this broader impact. What began as a crisis response to discrimination in one company has sparked a revolution in how businesses think about equity, he wrote. The Meridian model is proving that genuine commitment to fair treatment isn't just morally right, it's economically advantageous. The twins had become powerful advocates for institutional change, speaking at conferences, consulting with other companies, and working with civil rights organizations to implement similar accountability programs across various industries. Their story had inspired young people throughout the country and internationally, demonstrating that individuals could challenge discriminatory systems and create meaningful, lasting transformation. But their most important test was still coming. For in 1 week they would be flying Meridian Aviation again from Miami to New York to see whether the changes were genuine and permanent or merely cosmetic public relations gestures designed to weather the media storm. As the day of their flight approached, Dominic met with his daughters in his home office, the same space where he had once taught them about navigating a world that might not always welcome them with open arms. "Are you nervous?" he asked, noticing the slight tension in Amara's usually composed demeanor. "A little," she admitted. "It's one thing to talk about change in conference rooms and interviews. It's another to experience it firsthand in the same place where everything happened." Naomi nodded in agreement. "What if it's all just for show? What if things go back to the way they were? Once people stop paying attention." Dominic considered their concerns carefully. "That's exactly why this test flight is so important. Real change isn't about what happens when everyone's watching. It's about what happens when they think no one is. That's why I've arranged for you to travel without any special identification or treatment. As far as the staff is concerned, you'll be just 2 more clients booking a routine charter." He reached for a small wooden box on his desk, opening it to reveal 2 worn photographs himself as a young man standing proudly in his first aviation uniform, and beside it a picture of his own father outside the small mechanic shop where he had worked for 30 years. "My father taught me that change is never guaranteed, never complete," he said quietly. "He fought discrimination his whole life and never saw the changes we're making now. But he kept fighting anyway because he believed each generation should have to fight a little less hard than the one before it." He closed the box gently. "This trip isn't just about seeing whether our company has changed. It's about seeing whether we've honored his legacy by moving the needle even a little bit toward the world he imagined. We'll do this for him too." Then Amara said, placing her hand on her father's, "And for all the others who never had the power to make the systems that excluded them finally listen." The transformation of Meridian Aviation had extended far beyond policies and procedures to encompass the physical environment of their terminals as well. The Miami facility had been redesigned to create a more welcoming and inclusive atmosphere with artwork and design elements celebrating diverse cultures and communities. Customer service areas had been reconfigured to eliminate the intimidating barriers that had once separated staff from clients, replacing them with more open collaborative spaces that encouraged genuine interaction. But perhaps the most significant changes were invisible to the casual observer: the new hiring practices that had diversified the staff at all levels of the organization, the comprehensive training programs that went far beyond superficial compliance exercises, the accountability metrics that measured actual customer experiences rather than procedural checkboxes, and the empowerment of employees to challenge discriminatory behavior, regardless of who exhibited it. As the date of their flight approached, the twins prepared themselves for what would be both a practical test of Meridian's reforms and a deeply personal journey back to the scene of their humiliation. They packed the same luggage, wore similar outfits, and carried the same documentation they had brought on that fateful day 6 months earlier. The parallels were intentional, a controlled experiment to measure how much had truly changed. What they couldn't have anticipated was how this journey would transform not just their perception of Meridian Aviation, but their understanding of what genuine institutional change could look like when implemented with authentic commitment and accountability. The night before their flight, as they finished packing, Naomi turned to her sister with an unexpected question. "Do you think people can really change? Not just pretend to for the cameras, but actually transform who they are and how they see the world?" Amara paused, considering the question seriously. "I think it's rare, but possible. It requires facing uncomfortable truths about yourself and making a conscious choice to be different. Most people never get past the discomfort part." "I hope they have," Naomi said quietly. "Not just for our sake, but for everyone who comes after us." Across town, in a modest apartment, Ryan Whitfield sat at his kitchen table reviewing materials for tomorrow's training session with new customer service representatives. 6 months ago, he would have spent this time reviewing booking protocols and payment verification procedures. Now he was preparing to lead a session on recognizing and interrupting bias in customer interactions. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who had once been the face of discrimination at Meridian was now helping to dismantle the very system he had perpetuated. His journey from termination to redemption had been neither easy nor assured. It had begun with genuine remorse, continued through difficult self-examination, and culminated in his commitment to use his experience to prevent others from making the same mistakes. As he organized his notes for tomorrow's session, he reflected on how completely his perspective had changed in just 6 months. The defensive, self-justifying response that had characterized his initial disciplinary hearing had given way to a humbled recognition of the harm he had caused and a genuine commitment to repair it. He wasn't proud of his past actions, but he was determined that they would serve as a powerful teaching tool for others. Similar scenes were playing out across the company as employees at all levels prepared for what they knew would be a crucial test of their transformation. For some, like Captain James Harrington, the changes had come too late to save their careers at Meridian. He had resigned rather than participate in the comprehensive retraining program, maintaining to the end that his actions had been justified by security concerns. But for many others, the crisis had become a catalyst for profound personal and professional growth. The most unexpected transformation had perhaps been in Vanessa Rodriguez, who had embraced the change process with such commitment and insight that she had recently been appointed to lead Meridian's newly established Office of Equity and Inclusion. Her unique perspective as someone who had both experienced discrimination and at times perpetuated it gave her a nuanced understanding of the complex dynamics at play within the organization. "I carry both sides of this story within me," she had explained during her interview for the position. "I know what it feels like to be excluded and diminished because of who you are. But I also know how easy it is to become part of a system that does the same to others when you're fighting to survive within it. That dual perspective is what I bring to this role, both empathy for those who experience discrimination and insight into how and why people participate in discriminatory systems, often without fully recognizing what they're doing." As the company prepared for the twins' return, there was a palpable sense of both anticipation and apprehension. Everyone understood the symbolic importance of this moment, not just for Meridian Aviation's public image, but for their own sense of whether the changes they had worked so hard to implement were truly taking root. Outside the Miami terminal, a small group had gathered to mark the occasion, not protesters this time, but supporters. Community advocates, civil rights leaders, and ordinary citizens who had been moved by the twins' story stood together holding signs that read, "Thank you for your courage and your voice changed an industry." Many were people who had experienced similar discrimination but had never had the power to challenge it effectively. Among them stood Ethan Winters, no longer just documenting the story, but feeling personally invested in its outcome. The twins' journey had transformed his understanding of journalism's purpose not just to report on injustice, but to illuminate the pathways to meaningful change. What no one could have predicted was how this test would reveal both the remarkable progress they had made and the challenging road that still lay ahead. Hit that like button if you believe in second chances and the power of real transformation. 1 year after their experience that had grounded an entire aviation company, Amara and Naomi Jackson stood once again at Miami Executive Airport's private terminal. They were at the same facility where they had been repeatedly discriminated against, the same terminal where they had been accused of fraud and threatened with arrest, the same location where they had been forced to document evidence of racism and fight for their basic dignity as human beings. But everything was fundamentally and dramatically different. Now the gate agent, a young Latina woman named Sofia Rodriguez, checked their charter confirmation with genuine warmth and professional efficiency. "Good afternoon, ladies. New York today for more college visits." She processed their documentation without excessive scrutiny, treating them with the same casual courtesy and respect she showed every customer regardless of their appearance or background. "Yes," Amara replied, still slightly amazed that this ordinary routine interaction, completely unremarkable to most travelers, represented such a profound transformation from their previous devastating experience. As she handed back their boarding passes, Sophia's eyes briefly met Amara's with a flash of recognition, not of their faces or names, which had been kept out of the media, but of what their experience had meant to someone like her. "I hope you have an excellent flight," she added with genuine warmth. "And thank you." The simple acknowledgement, subtle enough to maintain their privacy but meaningful enough to convey understanding, created an unexpected moment of connection between them. They moved through security with minimal delay and appropriate professionalism. The screening process was thorough but respectful, conducted by agents who treated them as valued customers rather than potential criminals. Their belongings were handled carefully. Their privacy was respected, and their documentation was processed efficiently without discriminatory questioning or invasive searches. Amara felt the tension she'd been carrying in her shoulders, tension she hadn't even realized was there until it began to dissolve, gradually release, as they progressed through the terminal without incident. The contrast between this experience and their last visit was so stark that it felt almost surreal, like walking through a familiar landscape that had been completely transformed. At the Sky Lounge Cafe, where they had previously been denied service and excluded based on their race, they were seated immediately by a hostess who apologized for a brief delay while their preferred table was cleaned and prepared. The service was attentive and professional, with staff members who treated them as welcome guests rather than unwanted intruders. As they enjoyed a light meal before their flight, Naomi leaned forward, speaking quietly. "Do you think they know who we are?" Amara shook her head slightly. "I don't think so. Dad made sure our names were kept out of the public coverage and we never gave interviews. I think this is just how things are supposed to be now." The realization landed with unexpected emotional weight. What they were experiencing wasn't special treatment or performance for their benefit. It was simply the normal, dignified service that should have been their right all along, now extended to everyone regardless of appearance or background. As they boarded their charter aircraft, they were greeted by Captain Lydia Martinez, a Hispanic pilot whose natural hairstyle and confident demeanor would have been deemed unprofessional under Meridian Aviation's previous discriminatory policies. She welcomed them aboard with genuine warmth and pride, representing the kind of authentic diversity the company now embraced rather than merely tolerated for public relations purposes. "Welcome aboard, ladies," Captain Martinez said with a smile that reflected genuine hospitality rather than artificial courtesy. "We're honored to be flying you to New York today, and I hope you have a wonderful experience with Meridian Aviation." The cabin itself reflected the company's transformation not just in the diversity of its crew, but in subtle design changes that created a more inclusive environment. The safety briefing included information in multiple languages and accommodations for passengers with different abilities. The in-flight magazine featured articles by diverse writers, highlighting a wide range of cultural perspectives. Even the refreshment options had expanded to include foods and beverages from various cultural traditions. As the aircraft climbed toward cruising altitude, the twins reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this moment. The discrimination they had faced had been real, painful, and traumatic, but their response had created ripple effects and institutional changes they could never have imagined possible. Ryan Whitfield was now leading comprehensive sensitivity training sessions for customer service representatives throughout the aviation industry, using his own transformation from discriminatory employee to civil rights advocate as a powerful example of the possibility for redemption and genuine change. His presentations had become mandatory training at over 40 aviation companies across the country. His journey hadn't been smooth. There had been setbacks, moments of defensiveness, times when old habits reasserted themselves. But his commitment to the process of change had remained steadfast, fueled by an increasingly genuine desire to repair the harm he had caused and prevent others from making the same mistakes. Thomas Burke had become a federal consultant specializing in eliminating discriminatory profiling in airport security procedures, working with the Transportation Security Administration to develop new protocols that protected both security and civil rights. His expertise in recognizing the patterns he had once perpetrated made him uniquely qualified to help prevent future incidents of discrimination. I spent 20 years enforcing a system that didn't make anyone safer, just less equal. He had told a congressional committee reviewing security protocols. Now I'm using that same experience to build something that actually works security based on behavior and evidence, not bias and fear. Captain James Harrington had left the aviation industry entirely and enrolled in a master's program in social work and conflict resolution. His experience of being held accountable for his discriminatory actions had led to profound personal transformation, and he was now dedicated to helping other people examine their own unconscious biases and develop more inclusive perspectives. Vanessa Rodriguez had been promoted to Director of Diversity and Inclusion for all of Meridian Aviation's operations, leading the company's transformation efforts with the passion and commitment of someone who understood both the damage that discrimination could cause and the profound importance of creating genuinely inclusive environments. Her journey from enabler of discrimination to champion of civil rights had made her one of the most respected voices in corporate diversity initiatives. Even Gabriel Thompson, the restaurant manager who had excluded them from the Sky Lounge Cafe, had undergone significant personal and professional transformation. The restaurant chain had implemented Meridian Aviation's anti-discrimination model across all their locations, with Gabriel serving as a case study in their comprehensive training programs about the importance of equal treatment and inclusive hospitality. But the changes extended far beyond individual transformation and corporate policy adjustments. The aviation industry as a whole had been forced to confront its treatment of minority customers in ways that would have been unimaginable before the twins' experience. Congressional hearings had led to new federal regulations requiring transparent reporting of discrimination complaints and standardized training for all aviation industry employees. The Fair Skies Act mandated that all aviation companies collect and publish data on service quality metrics broken down by customer demographics, creating unprecedented transparency and accountability throughout the industry. Other airlines and private aviation companies had implemented their own accountability measures, though none as comprehensive or effective as Meridian Aviation's groundbreaking program. The Federal Aviation Administration now required all certified carriers to maintain bias awareness training and discrimination prevention protocols as part of their operational certification. The impact had spread across industries. Luxury hotels had implemented the Equitable Service Platform to monitor potential disparities in guest treatment. High-end retailers had adopted transparency initiatives including body cameras and demographic service metrics. Even financial institutions had begun incorporating aspects of the Meridian model into their client service protocols. The business case for equity had been proven so convincingly that it was becoming a competitive necessity rather than a moral luxury. Ethan Winter's reporting on these broader impacts had earned him a Pulitzer Prize nomination and established him as a leading voice in the emerging field of equity journalism. His ongoing series, Beyond Meridian, The Ripple Effects of Corporate Accountability, documented how a single incident of discrimination and the courageous response to it had catalyzed change across multiple sectors of American business. The twins had testified before Congress, spoken at major universities, and worked with civil rights organizations to expand their anti-discrimination model to other industries, including hospitality, retail, healthcare, and financial services. Their story had become a catalyst for broader conversations about institutional racism and the power of individual action to create institutional social change. As their flight approached LaGuardia Airport, Amara opened her laptop to review her notes for the next day's presentation at Columbia Law School, where she was now a sophomore after deferring her admission by a year to work full-time on civil rights advocacy. Naomi was studying international business and corporate ethics at Yale, focusing her academic work on developing sustainable approaches to diversity and inclusion in global corporations. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final descent into New York," came Captain Martinez's voice over the intercom. "On behalf of the entire crew, thank you for choosing Meridian Aviation. We know you have many options in private aviation, and we're honored that you trusted us to provide not just safe and comfortable transportation, but service that honors the dignity and worth of every passenger who flies with us." The words were more than corporate marketing script. They represented a fundamental shift in how the company understood its mission and responsibilities. Transportation wasn't just about moving people efficiently from one location to another. It was about treating every human being with the respect, courtesy, and dignity they deserved, regardless of their background, appearance, or perceived social status. As they deplaned at LaGuardia Airport, the twins were approached by a young black girl, perhaps 8 years old, traveling with her family from Miami to visit colleges with her older sister. "Are you the sisters who changed the airplane company?" she asked, with the innocent directness that only children possess. Amara knelt down to the child's eye level, remembering her own feelings of vulnerability and determination exactly 1 year earlier. "We're Amara and Naomi." "What's your name, sweetheart?" "I'm Zoe. My mom told me that you made it so people like us get treated the same as everyone else when we fly on airplanes." Naomi felt tears forming in her eyes as she realized the profound impact of their courage. This child would never know the fear, humiliation, and coordinated discrimination they had experienced. She would travel through the world with one less barrier to overcome, one less source of anxiety and stress, one less reason to feel like a second-class citizen in her own country. "That's exactly right, Zoe," Amara said gently but firmly. "And you know what's most important. If anyone ever treats you unfairly or differently because of how you look, you have the right to speak up and demand better treatment. Your voice matters. Your dignity is important, and you deserve to be treated with the same respect as everyone else." The child nodded solemnly, absorbing the lesson with the seriousness it deserved, and then ran back to her parents, who smiled gratefully at the twins before disappearing into the bustling crowd of travelers. If you believe in the power of standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, hit that subscribe button and share this video to spread the message of dignity and equality. As Amara and Naomi walked through LaGuardia's busy terminal toward their next chapter, they carried with them the profound knowledge that their courage had created something far more significant and lasting than individual justice. They had helped build a world where that little girl and countless others like her could travel with dignity and confidence, knowing that their rights would be protected and their humanity would be respected. The twins paused at the large windows overlooking the tarmac, watching as aircraft from dozens of different airlines prepared for departure. Each plane represented thousands of passengers who would now benefit from the industry-wide changes that had stemmed from their refusal to accept discrimination quietly. "Do you ever think about what Dad said that day on the jet bridge?" Naomi asked thoughtfully. "About how we didn't cause a crisis, but exposed one that was already there." "Every single day," Amara replied, her voice filled with quiet pride and determination. "But I also think about what we prove to ourselves and the world, that when you refuse to accept good enough as actually good enough, when you demand that institutions live up to their stated values rather than their hidden practices, real change becomes not just possible, but inevitable." Their phones buzzed simultaneously with a news alert that made them both smile. Federal Aviation Administration announces comprehensive anti-discrimination training requirements for all commercial and private aviation employees nationwide, based on the groundbreaking Meridian Aviation model developed after the Jackson incident. This powerful story reminds us that real change is possible when we have the courage to stand up for what's right. If you were moved by Amara and Naomi's journey, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel for more inspiring content, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. Your support helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. Don't forget to leave a comment below sharing your own experiences with discrimination or standing up for justice. Together, we can create a more equitable world for everyone. Thank you for watching.